Hi guys. I made a paid service in Telegram where you will find a great collection of fanfiction audiobooks organized and regularly updated. What you get? An unlimited access to the full audiobook library. New fanfiction audiobooks added regularly. You can play audios directly from Telegram anytime. Joining our service is available through a monthly subscription of $5. You can pay using PayPal or Ko-fi. So what are you waiting for? Send me a message on Telegram or Discord. I will provide the payment details. After the payment is confirmed, you will receive access to the private Telegram channel containing all audiobooks. If you enjoy fanfiction and prefer listening instead of reading, this library is made for you. Message me anytime to join.
1. Chapter 1. Finish what you were saying. Dematia, a remote frontier town. The bright moon hung high. The weather was mild, and the cicadas wouldn't stop chirping. The scenery around here wasn't anything special, just grass and trees, an endless stretch of green that made the whole place feel soaked in summer. By the fence outside a secluded little shack, Luke leaned with his back against the wood. He wore a rough linen shirt, sleeves missing, both arms bare. Staring into the distance, he let out a weary sigh. Behind him, the shack looked like it had been standing for who knew how many years old and worn. A faint candlelight flickered inside, swaying with each bout of soft coughing. Before long, the coughing worsened, as if whoever was inside was about to hack out their lungs. Just listening made it obvious the owner of that voice was suffering. She was gravely ill. Hearing it, Luke sighed again. Right now, he really wanted to light a cigarette and ask himself a question. How did my life get this miserable? The woman coughing inside was his mother. Her name was Melai. Information Luke had pieced together from scattered fragments of memory in his head. When Luke transmigrated here 3 days ago, this was exactly what he'd walked into. The original owner of this body seemed to have tried to jump off a cliff, and Luke just happened to pick up the bargain by taking over. What he didn't expect was that the moment he arrived, he'd also gain a bedridden, critically ill mother to care for. The most ridiculous part was that this family had been out of food for a long time. The 2 pieces of bread under his hand right now were something Luke had traded for by doing a day of temp work. And now, he didn't just have to fill his own stomach, he also had to take care of the sick person inside. Should I just run for it? He muttered. Another burst of coughing came from behind him, and the thought popped into Luke's mind again. He shook his head and forced it down. Some things, once you do them, you'll regret them for the rest of your life. Even if he didn't have any real feelings for the woman in that room, this body still shared her blood. Am I really going to have to sell my looks? Luke muttered. The general store owner's daughter has practically spelled it out for me. He plucked a piece of foxtail grass from somewhere, stuck it between his lips, and stared ahead with the eyes of someone who'd seen too much. This option felt like it might haunt him forever, too. When he pictured the general store owner's daughter, 200, maybe close to 300 pounds of her, that wide smile, thighs so slick they practically shone. Luke swallowed hard. No, I'll think of something else. In the end, he couldn't cross that mental line. He decided to take it one step at a time. Over the last 2 days, he'd set up 2 simple hunting traps in the mountains. He should catch something today. In a bit, he'd go check. As for everything else, he'd deal with it when he was actually about to starve. Cough, cough, look, cough, cough, come inside. His mother's call, broken up by coughing, pulled Luke out of his thoughts. He turned his head and answered, I'm coming, mother. Then he headed into the shack. It wasn't far at all. By the time he finished responding, he was already at the door. He pushed it open and saw the cramped interior. On a wooden bedboard lay his mother, hair mostly white with a few strands of black mixed in. Her face was deathly pale and gaunt, her eyes dull with exhaustion. She was only in her 40s, yet the illness had worn her down until she looked like someone in her 70s. It was pitiful. Luke walked up and crouched beside her. Are you hungry? Melly forced herself to turn slightly. Her eyes were weak, but the gentleness in them was unmistakable as she looked at Luke. In a raspy voice, she said, No, I just want to talk to you. Go ahead, Luke replied. I'm listening. He didn't have anything else to do right now anyway. And who knew, maybe this unfamiliar mother would drop some earth-shattering secret. Over all these years you've suffered, taking care of me. Melly looked at Luke with pain and tenderness in her expression. Luke answered immediately, it wasn't hard. It really hadn't been. If he had to name something that suffered, it was his stomach. He'd wake up hungry all the time. Have you ever regretted being my son? Something changed in Melly's eyes, a layer of meaning Luke couldn't quite read. Still, he answered honestly. No. The person who could have answered that question was already gone. So of course Luke picked the nicer answer. Saying something that made a dying person feel better wasn't difficult. I regret it, Melly said softly. I regret being your mother. That made Luke blink, confused. But Melly continued, and it was like she suddenly looked years younger, not in her body, but in her gaze. She stopped looking at Luke and instead stared at something far away, something in her past. I was an extremely selfish, stupid woman. The decision I regret most is giving birth to you, making you wander from hardship to hardship, never living a good life for more than a few days. It's all because of the choice I made back then. Only now do I realize how foolish I was. I didn't even consider what you would want. I intended to take this secret into my grave and protect it for my whole life. But these past few days I've finally thought it through. I don't have the right to do that, because this is your life. After a long stretch of confession, Melly looked back at Luke. Speaking so much had left her even weaker. She reached out and grabbed his hand, holding it tightly, then forced out the words with difficulty. Behind the cabinet against the wall there's a hidden compartment. Inside are two things. Keep the necklace. Use the other as travel money. Go to the capital. Actually you are. Her hand went slack, dropping lifelessly. The light in her eyes scattered, fading into emptiness. Luke froze, completely stunned. He nudged her, trying to get a response. Mother, finish what you were saying. What am I? Damn it. If you had the strength to say all that, why didn't you say the important part first? He looked at her again. Melly was gone. And once she was gone it would be forever. But maybe it was better this way. She was only 40-something, yet this illness had tormented her for years. From now on, she wouldn't suffer anymore. Remembering what she'd said, Luke shoved the cabinet aside. He fumbled around for a while, searching, until he finally found a hidden compartment with difficulty. He reached in, and his fingers quickly closed around a black sandalwood box. Just from the feel of it, it seemed expensive. So what? My mother used to be some noble lady who ran away with a commoner. Luke's mind raced. And now she wants me to go back to the family and take back what's rightfully mine. He opened the sandalwood box. Inside was a delicate necklace. A smooth gemstone hung from it, round and crystal clear, beautiful, like an angel's eye. Within the gemstone were 3 prismatic star-like shapes, arranged almost like a trident. This necklace was absolutely worth a lot of money. So why hadn't she pulled it out earlier and sold it, so the family could live better? Luke grumbled to himself, but like Melly had said, it had been her choice. There were 2 items in the box. The other was a gold bracelet, finely crafted, definitely something that would fetch a good price. Luke decided to do what Melly told him. He'd sell the gold bracelet, keep the necklace, and head to the capital. He was very interested in the story behind this necklace and in the world he'd ended up in. Chapter 2, The Dematian Capital. In the blink of an eye, 2 months passed, and true summer arrived. Dematia capital. A towering silver-white city wall looked solemn and imposing, its white bricks linked together like a suit of gleaming white armor. Outside the wall, a white statue stood in silence, gazing down at the great city before it. Beneath the walls, lines of people streamed in and out while armored guards questioned them one by one. Name: Luke. Age: 18. Where are you from? You ask that too. Orders from above. They're being strict lately. What happened? Are you questioning me, or am I questioning you? Where are you from? Luke answered honestly. The East. Terran town. Never heard of it. The guard looked the young man over. Luke was plainly dressed, with striking black hair. His eyes were brown, and he was fairly handsome, almost like he had mixed blood. He was also about as tall as the guard. The guard's gaze dropped to the bundle in Luke's hands. What's in the bundle? Personal belongings. You want to see? Luke didn't really care. He opened it up. Water, food, a change of clothes, and a smaller pouch with what little travel money he had left. In 2 months, he'd almost burned through the money he'd gotten from selling the gold bracelet and the sandalwood box. He was sure the merchant who bought them off him had a black heart, but he had no choice. Either sell or starve. Half the money had gone to his mother in this body. Melly had lived poor her whole life, so Luke at least gave her a decent funeral, found her a respectable cemetery plot, something that let him feel like he'd given an answer to the dead. The other half had been just enough to make it here. All right, go on in. Welcome to the royal capital. The guard only gave the contents a quick glance and didn't take it seriously. He smiled and stepped aside. Luke walked forward into the city, and the moment he entered, the sight grabbed him. As expected of Dematia's capital, it was so vast it felt endless. Buildings clustered like a mountain range, spreading outward in layers, some tall, some low. The streets were packed with people, lively and loud. He'd passed through a major city on the road, but compared to the capital, it didn't even come close. On Runeterra, a world with only a handful of true powers, a main city of this scale meant something. It was proof of strength. Over these 2 months, Luke had figured out exactly where he was. Runeterra, world behind the game League of Legends. And Dematia was one of its nations. A place where certain champions made their mark. Before transmigrating, Luke had been a veteran player. He wasn't a lore expert, but he knew the basics. And just looking at what champions could do made one thing clear: this world wasn't normal. For ordinary people, it was extremely dangerous. A random catastrophe could break out overnight, and they'd become nothing but cannon fodder. In the game, the champion's power was balanced into a neat set of numbers. But in the real setting, a truly powerful champion could level a city with ease. And in the Runeterra Luke had landed in, there were even more terrifying figures, people who weren't champions, but still possessed extraordinary strength. Based on what Luke knew, it wouldn't be long before a disaster arrived. Great. Dropped in and the pressure's already crushing, Luke muttered. He subconsciously touched his waist. The necklace was hidden there, wrapped in tape, layer after layer, so tight it never shifted. He hadn't even taken it off to sleep. He had to. With the situation as it was, this necklace mattered. A lot. It could very well change the course of his entire future. From what he understood of this world, every region and nation had its own strengths and weaknesses. For example, in Dematia, a hereditary monarchy, an ordinary person's safety could be protected to a certain extent. King Jarvan III was famously benevolent, treating his people well. And if something went wrong, the stronger nobles would be the ones standing at the front to hold the line. But the downside was just as obvious. For a commoner, if you didn't have some ridiculous talent or opportunity, you might never climb very high in your life. Because most of the advantages had already been carved up by the nobles. That said, Dematia's overall character wasn't bad. Among both citizens and nobles, there were plenty of people who genuinely valued justice. If the necklace didn't change Luke's situation, then he'd have to seriously consider leaving Dematia and finding another path. For now, Luke wandered the streets without direction, thinking to himself, okay, I made it to the capital. Now what? Melly's last words had only told him this much: come to the capital with the necklace. But once he got here, what was he supposed to do? Just judging from the gold bracelet and the gemstone necklace in the sandalwood box, Melly must have had a respectable status at some point. At the very least, she'd been noble-born. Forget the other items, just that gemstone necklace alone wasn't something an ordinary family, or even a slightly well-off one, could ever possess. I can't exactly walk up to some random noble, Luke thought as he walked, immediately killing the idea. The capital might be crawling with nobles, but if anyone got ideas about the necklace, then even a minor noble could crush Luke without effort. No exaggeration, the necklace was Luke's lifeline. Come take a look. Come see for yourselves. A loud call from the roadside caught Luke's attention. He saw a crowd gathering in that direction, like something interesting was going on. Technically, Luke should have been focusing on serious business right now, but the truth was, he couldn't think of a single good plan. So he stopped forcing it. If he couldn't act yet, he might as well take a look around the royal capital first. At the center of the crowd was a small stall. The stall owner sat cross-legged on the ground without a care in the world, bare-armed in the summer heat, fiddling with a thick hemp rope 3 or 4 centimeters thick and more than half a meter long. More and more people gathered. Luke arrived early enough to snag a spot right at the front. After shouting a few more times and seeing the crowd grow, the stall owner lifted the rope, folded it in half, and began to explain. Today, we're gonna play a little game. Everyone sees this rope, right? Now watch, turn it into a small circle. See, now there are 3 little loops in the middle. As he spoke, the rope on the surface in front of him coiled into shape, and sure enough, 3 smaller loops appeared inside. Now watch closely. I stick this rod through this loop, then I give the rope a pull, see that? The stall owner tugged the loose end. The rope began to return to its original form, and at that moment, the rod ended up wedged right in the center of the rope, blocking it in place. Chapter 3, Miss Crown Guard. Next up, the game is really simple. You're just picking a rope hole. Whether you pick a hole where the rod ends up looping through the rope, or a hole where the rod blocks the rope, either works just like what you saw just now. Everyone got it. The stall owner looked up, smiling warmly. People around Luke whispered to each other, clearly trying to break it down. Luke had pretty much understood it too. The rules were minimal, and the game itself was simple. 3 rope holes, pick one. If you picked the hole where the rod blocked the rope, then you won the way the stall owner just demonstrated. If you picked the hole where the rope looped around the rod, then it would have to be one of the other 2. Anyone want to come up and play? The stall owner invited them, then added, but we're not playing for free. If you want to play, you pay at least 3 silver coins each time. More is up to you. If you pick right, I pay you back what you wagered. If you pick wrong, the money's mine. I'll do it. A spectator who'd clearly been itching to try strode forward, face full of excitement. He neatly took out 3 silver coins and placed them on the right side of the tabletop. All right, watch closely. I'm starting. The stall owner didn't waste words. He got to work immediately, looping and looping the rope with fast hands, especially tossing in some flashy body movements to distract the audience. But in truth, it still wasn't hard to follow. The rope had a head and a tail. Whether it ended up looping around the rod or getting blocked by it, the basic outcome was straightforward. Okay, your pick. The stall owner handed the rod to the spectator. The spectator didn't hesitate. He chose a rope hole and jabbed the rod down, then said, I'm choosing for the rope to loop around the rod. Alright everyone, and you two watch carefully. The stall owner began pulling the rope. The loops shrank one after another, writhing like a little snake, until finally even the tail slipped past the rod. In the end, only the rod remained, standing alone in the middle. Congratulations. You got it. The stall owner smiled broadly, congratulated him, and without any sign of reluctance, paid out 3 silver coins. Just like that, the spectator earned 3 silver. He didn't push his luck, he left beaming. With one person already profiting, the rest of the crowd couldn't hold back anymore. People started stepping up to play. In the meantime, the stall owner did manage to fool a few pairs of eyes with his technique, making them wager wrong, but overall, he was losing badly. The crowd got bigger and bigger. Luke watched 2 or 3 rounds, felt it wasn't that interesting, and decided to leave. Can I play a round 2? Just then, a crisp, pleasant voice came from the back of the crowd, clearly a girl's. People shifted aside to make room. A blonde girl squeezed her way in, her big eyes filled with curiosity about the game. Luke stopped and looked over. Beyond being impressed, he was also a little surprised. He hadn't expected to run into a champion this soon. The girl had a soft oval face with a youthful innocence. Her features looked like they'd been delicately sculpted, bright eyes and white teeth, especially those vivid azure blue eyes that were irresistibly captivating. Her brilliant blonde hair looked like sunlight had been poured over it. She drew attention just by standing there. And she was unmistakable. Quite a few people nearby had already recognized her. Miss Crown Guard. Hearing that, Luke's guess was fully confirmed. The blonde girl in front of him was that champion, the Lady of Luminosity, Lux. After all, the Crown Guard name carried enormous weight in Dematia. Not just anyone could be addressed as Miss Crown Guard. No one seemed especially shocked that Lux had appeared, as if seeing her here wasn't strange at all. Can I play around? Lux walked up to the stall, a cute smile on her face as she repeated what she'd said earlier. It was obvious she was genuinely interested in this. The stall owner paused, then answered, "Of course. Do you understand the rules?" "I do." Lux nodded seriously. The stall owner said, "Then please place your wager." Lux took out an exquisite coin purse from her pocket, pulled out a shiny gold coin, and set it on the tabletop. Then she stared at the stall owner without blinking, clearly not planning to miss a single movement. "All right, then I'll begin." Seeing her open with a gold coin, the stall owner got serious too. He muttered under his breath while his hand sped up even more. Very quickly, the 3 rope holes appeared. Lux rested her hand under her chin and studied it for a moment. Then she took the rod and stabbed it into one of the rope holes, declaring confidently, "I'm choosing for the rope to loop around the rod." Her choice was logical. Statistically, rope loops around the rod had a 2 in 3 chance, while rod blocks the rope was only 1 in 3. Most people would choose the rope looping around. And then, as the stall owner pulled the rope, it ended up being blocked by the rod. Lux's eyes widened a little, looking genuinely baffled. The spectators around her couldn't help sighing for her. The stall owner smiled. "Miss Crown Guard, looks like your luck's a bit off today. Want to try again?" "I still didn't hit it." Lux clearly wasn't convinced. She pulled out another gold coin and put it down, her expression even more focused this time. "You really need to watch carefully this round," the stall owner said. He repeated the same routine, quickly reaching the moment where Lux had to choose again. Lux didn't blink once the whole time. Completely certain, she stabbed the rod into a rope hole. "This time it can't be wrong. I'm choosing for the rope to loop around the rod." As the stall owner pulled the rope, the crowd sucked in a collective breath. Because this time the rope was blocked by the rod again. Lux was completely stunned now. She couldn't understand how she could still be wrong. The stall owner cleared his throat twice. "Seems you're not having much luck today." A spectator muttered, "In a way, that's pretty lucky, two times in a row landing on the blocked result." Another spectator suggested, "Then why not try choosing the blocked one this time? Maybe you'll win back what you lost." Someone else objected, No, she's already lost 2 gold coins. If it were me, I'd stop now, cut your losses while you can." Hearing the voices around her, Lux was clearly getting carried away. She let out a heavy breath, stubbornly pulled out 2 more gold coins, and slapped them down. "Again. If you still want to play, then watch closely this time," the stall owner said. He obviously wasn't going to pass up the chance to make money, and he smoothly repeated the process. It was Lux's turn to choose again. This time she didn't hesitate at all, immediately picking a rope hole. "This time I'm choosing for the rod to block the rope." Chapter 4, Why does this mark look so much like me? Alright, watch closely. The stall owner started pulling the rope. It lengthened little by little while Lux stared at it, tense. The next second, she went completely blank. In those beautiful eyes of hers, the rope slowly, unmistakably looped around the rod until, in the end, the tabletop was left with nothing but the rod in her hand. Hiss. A few sharp inhales came from the crowd. Even the spectators hadn't expected Miss Crown Guard's luck to be this terrible. She'd picked wrong again. At this point, Lux might as well have unlucky written across her face. Even the stall owner looked a little helpless. He tried to comfort her. "Sometimes luck just goes like that. Before you came, there was someone who tried 5 times and didn't hit once." The moment he finished, someone in the crowd responded with a sigh. "That was me." "Miss Crown Guard, don't take it too hard. When you're unlucky, even drinking water gets stuck between your teeth." Hearing someone had been even more miserable than her, Lux felt slightly better. Up until now, she still believed she'd missed 3 times purely because her luck was bad. Earlier, when she saw other people miss, she'd even thought they were idiots. How could you possibly pick wrong when the rope has a head and a tail? As long as you kept track of the folded end at the start, there was no way to mess it up. Now that it was her turn, Lux realized it didn't work like that at all. There was a huge luck component. Yes, absolutely luck. Definitely not because she was dumb. But very soon, after 2 more rounds, Lux fully started questioning reality. She had already missed 5 times in a row and her wagers had gone from 2 gold coins to 8. How could someone's luck be this bad? Lux couldn't understand it. One more time. She forced herself to reset, looking exactly like a gambler who'd lost until she saw red. She decided to play one more round and she was convinced she'd figured it out this time. She took out 10 gold coins at once, clearly intending to win back everything she'd lost in one shot. Sure. I'm always happy to play, the stall owner said with a gentle smile. He began performing the familiar routine again. Lux thought this was where she'd been losing, so she stared harder than ever. But even though his hands were fast, the rope was only so long there was nothing obvious to catch. 3 holes again. When it came time to choose, Lux wasn't as decisive as before. She hesitated. Like a chess player stuck in indecision, she didn't know where to place her piece. At that moment, someone from the audience spoke up. I think the left rope hole is the one that gets blocked. The other 2 should loop around the rod. People looked over and felt like he seemed familiar. The man scratched his head and grinned. I've had pretty decent luck, won 4 rounds in a row earlier. There really had been someone like that. Once he started offering suggestions, the crowd began analyzing too. Then 2 more spectators who'd guessed right a lot also stepped up, both recommending the left hole. Lux, at this point, was like a blade of grass drifting with the current. She'd lost a good chunk of her own judgment. Hearing everyone's analysis, plus her own half-formed reasoning, it all sounded very convincing. So she chose the left rope hole. This time, I'm choosing for the rod to block the rope. Alright, hope you win back what you lost, the stall owner said. As soon as he finished, he began pulling the rope. Lux stared even more intensely than before, only to freeze again. This time too she'd chosen wrong. The rope ultimately looped around the rod. The stall owner said regretfully, what a shame. Wrong again. The crowd's chatter instantly grew louder. The spectators who'd given advice were sighing and groaning, saying they'd misread it, that Lux's luck was just too awful, and so on. No one can be unlucky forever. 7 tries and I still won't hit even once. Lux snapped back to herself, fully worked up now, pure stubborn defiance. She dumped the remaining gold coins from her coin purse onto the tabletop, more than 10, glittering and eye-catching. Back and forth like this, Lux had already lost a lot. Dematia's cost of living wasn't high. A single gold coin could cover a normal family's expenses for a long time. And Lux had already lost at least 20 gold coins. Even for her, that was no small amount of spending money. If she lost again, she'd really be taking a serious hit. But if she didn't win back what she'd lost, she knew she'd go home furious and lie awake all night. Several spectators around her echoed her thinking. People felt she was due for a lucky round after all. Missing 6 times in a row had basically set a record. Maybe you should stop, Miss Crown Guard. I think it's better to cut your losses, or you'll lose even more. This is a luck game, sometimes you just have to respect bad omens. Some of the crowd started trying to talk Lux out of it. But words like that only made a gambler who'd already lost a lot even more determined. Because no one believes they'll keep being unlucky forever. Luke watched the whole thing, and something felt off. He studied it carefully too, replaying the earlier rounds in his mind, and finally realized what was wrong. Right as the stall owner picked up the rope and started his routine, Luke spoke up from within the crowd, sounding thoughtful. I don't think this looks like a luck game, he said. It looks like a scam. His words cut through the noise and drew a lot of attention. Including Lux's sure focus was so sharp right now that she caught Luke's voice instantly. A spectator beside Luke asked, Kid, what do you mean by that? Exactly what it sounds like. Luke stepped forward a few paces until he was close to the stall, then continued, if it's truly a luck game, then Shuri, if you keep raising the stakes, sooner or later you'll win back what you lost. But what if it isn't a luck game? Miss Crown Guard, then all you'll do is raise your wagers higher and higher and lose more and more. The stall owner looked angry. He waved his hand and glared at Luke. Young man, don't cause trouble. What nonsense are you spouting? Let him finish. Lux finally seemed to react. She turned and looked at Luke. What do you mean by a scam? Up close, her face looked even more delicate, bright and youthful, with that unmistakable innocent charm. Luke explained, a scam like this is when a few people work together, waiting for a fat sheep to take the bait. The mark usually watches first and thinks, this game is so simple, how can people still bet wrong? Are they all idiots? But the moment the mark steps in, they've already walked right into the trap. Why does this fat sheep sound so much like me? Lux realized Luke had described her exact thought process. She couldn't help feeling a little guilty. So does that mean she was an idiot too? But how is that my fault? I'm not dumb. Seeing the look in Lux's eyes, Luke continued, it's not that the mark is dumb. It's that the scammers exploit common psychology. And besides the stall owner, he needs a few others to cooperate and lure the mark in. Luke glanced at the stall owner, who clearly wanted to speak, and didn't give him the chance. He turned and pointed at several people. You, and you, if I'm not mistaken, you're all plants, right? 2 of them were people who'd lost several rounds. One had won. Another had never played at all, just stood in the crowd offering helpful suggestions. The moment Luke pointed them out one by one, they instinctively dodged his finger. Some of them win, some lose, and some never play, Luke said. With that setup, if you were about to quit just now, they'd definitely find a way to convince you to keep playing. 5. Chapter 5, Exposing a Street Scam. I won't even explain what a shill everyone here understands. And if nothing unexpected happens, those two over there who won money and left are shills too, so why haven't they actually left? Luke spoke with total confidence. What do you mean by that? We didn't do anything from start to finish. How are we shills now? This is hilarious. Didn't expect to see something like this. I only showed up halfway through and I'm a shill too. The people Luke pointed at immediately got emotional, all of them glaring at Luke with anger and indignation. Lux felt a little dizzy, but she wasn't stupid. She was starting to piece it together. She really might have been tricked by a group working together. Kid, that joke isn't funny. Who would dare scam a crown guard? The stall owner spoke up, calm as ever. He smiled slightly, his expression still as gentle as it had been. He didn't look like a scammer at all. Luke looked at him and smiled back. You would. The capital's huge. You scam someone, lay low for a few days, then come back with a new trick and keep scamming people. Brother, I was just passing by, so let me say a word. A spectator who looked like a total bystander stepped forward. If you're trying to get Lux's attention, you don't need to use tactics like this. The people you're falsely accusing won't take it well. The way he spoke even sounded reasonable. His tone made him seem like an upright, kind-hearted guy. And just like that, he painted Luke as someone trying to pull a stunt to attract Lux's attention. The surrounding crowd immediately felt it made sense and started echoing him. Lux had seen plenty of boys try to catch her eye every trick in the book. Most of the time, she could tell. But this time, she didn't think Luke felt like that kind of person. No matter how slow she could be, she should have realized it by now. That feeling of being scammed was getting stronger and stronger inside her. Luke glanced at the man and chuckled. You're a shill too. Quit pretending you're just a passerby. Step aside. The man instantly looked awkward, shaking his head. You're unbelievable. Using methods like this, what girl would ever like you? See? Luke said, not bothering to respond to the crowd's criticism at all, continuing instead. In this kind of scam, the shill's job is exactly this: stir people's emotions. And the people getting stirred up won't even realize they're being led around by shills. He kept going. And naturally, they become another kind of shill in the scam. The ones telling you to quit, the ones telling you to play again, the ones who win money, the ones who lose money. Every role matters. When he finished, the crowd went quiet. No one wanted to admit they'd been emotionally manipulated. But their silence proved it. One of the people Luke had called a shill sneered. Ha, that's all just your analysis. If you're going to talk this big, you need evidence that convinces everyone. You can't just say whatever you want and have it be true. Will you hand me the rope? Luke asked with a faint smile, looking at the stall owner. That's how I make my living. How can I just let someone inspect it? The stall owner's expression didn't change, but inside he was already panicking. He saw the confidence in Luke's eyes. He didn't want to believe it, but his trick had probably been seen through. And the pressure of having his method exposed compared to the fact he had scammed Lux was nothing. The weight on his shoulders right now mostly came from one thing: he had tricked a crown guard. He hadn't planned on doing it at first, but Lux really was a clueless, easy mark. If he pulled this one off, he could live comfortably for a long time. Originally, I only wanted to play a little game with everyone for fun, the stall owner said, putting on a generous expression. Since you think I'm scamming, I'll return every coin I won exactly as it was. That should be enough, right? He pulled out the money he'd won and placed it on the tabletop. The gesture made him look like he really wasn't a scammer. Luke, of course, understood. From the start, the stall owner never had the nerve to truly confront him, because street scams like this were easy to expose once you knew where to look. Now that you can't keep acting anymore, you want to play the good guy and slip away, Luke said, then looked at Lux. Lux, what do you think? I don't think so. Lux had finally understood what was happening, and her expression was openly irritated. She was angry. Only now did that noble aura finally seep out of her, though with that fierce little face, she looked more like an angry cub. In the blink of an eye, the stall owner didn't hesitate at all. He sprang up and bolted, shooting out of the crowd like a gust of wind. All that remained was his retreating back as he fled in embarrassment. Stop. Lux didn't even have time to react properly. She could only shout, and he was already far away. The other shills saw this and quietly withdrew from the crowd too, scattering and escaping in different directions. Damn it, don't let me run into you again. Lux clenched her fist, fuming. The stall owner running away was proof enough he really was a scammer. But she still didn't understand how he had fooled her. She turned back to Luke, curiosity on her face. How did you figure out they were scamming people? The spectators who had joined in condemning Luke earlier were curious too. Luke walked up to the tabletop. The stall owner hadn't managed to take the rope and rod with him. Luke picked up the rope and said, the problem was always with this rope. When I asked him for it, I was basically telling him I already knew the trick. That's why he didn't even have the courage to face me. He ran. As he spoke, he began demonstrating the scam's process. He couldn't reproduce the exact sleight of hand, but the overall setup didn't change. He looped the rope into circles the way the scammer had, forming 3 rope holes in the middle. Lux, pick one. Luke gestured for Lux to choose. Lux took the rod, picked a rope hole, and said, I'm choosing for the rope to loop around the rod. This time, her tone carried confidence. Because Luke's hands were clumsy, there was basically nothing to hide, so whether the rope could loop around the rod should have been obvious at a glance. The same logic applied. The rope had a head and a tail. Then Luke pulled the rope. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the rope was blocked by the rod. I get it. Lux suddenly cried out, looking like she'd just been struck by a revelation. Luke's movements were slow enough for her to catch every detail. So the rope looks like one rope, but it's actually split into 3. Your eyes just think it's one. Each strand corresponds to one of the 3 holes. If the scammer wants to trick you, then no matter which hole you pick, even if you pick the correct one, he can quickly hook the other corresponding strand and switch it so the result becomes whatever he wants. After confidently finishing her analysis, Lux looked at Luke with eager expectation. Am I right? That's the core logic, Luke said. You're completely right. In simple terms, it was a visual deception. With enough practice, the quick rope switch could be done so smoothly no one noticed. The spectators around them understood now too. So that's how it works. Scammers are getting more and more disgusting. I was this close to getting tricked. Chapter 6, kind of like the sleazy stuff you read about. I almost got my little stash cleaned out by such a simple scam. Lux couldn't accept it. Just then, Luke happened to look over at her, and Lux stubbornly insisted, actually, if I played a few more rounds, I would have figured it out. Whether you would have figured it out or not, I have no idea. But by that point, the con artist would have already taken all your pocket money and disappeared. Luke didn't say those 2 lines out loud. He just kept a smile on his face. The people around them began to disperse. After Lux noticed that, she suddenly let out a miserable cry. It's over. Seeing that, Luke got a little curious and wanted to ask what, exactly, was over. My reputation is finished. Tomorrow, the whole capital is probably going to be talking about how I got scammed like an easy mark. The moment Lux thought of that, her face went pale. It was obvious she cared a lot about her image. Luke stayed silent. He couldn't help feeling that this lady of the Crown Guard family didn't exactly look like the sharpest knife in the drawer. Lux looked like a balloon that had been deflated. She seemed to have no energy at all, listless and dispirited, but in a strangely adorable way. But still, thank you. Otherwise I probably wouldn't have snacks to eat for a long time. As she spoke, Lux rallied a little. At least she hadn't lost anything substantial. Seeing that her pocket money hadn't been carried off by the swindler, her mood improved. After picking the gold coins up and putting them back into her purse, she added, my name is Luxana. What about you? Lux's full name was Luxana Crown Guard. But usually, people close to her just called her Lux. Luke. Luke introduced himself simply. The 2 of them walked while talking, and Lux continued, if it weren't for you this time, I would have lost a lot. In the future, if there's anything you need my help with, you have to come find me. I live with the Crown Guards, just give my name and that's enough. Luke immediately said, I don't think we need to wait for, in the future. I already have something I need Miss Crown Guard to help with right now. That was the real reason he hadn't left, and why he ultimately chose to step in and help. Normally, even if he realized it was a street scam, Luke wouldn't bother meddling. After all, he had no reason to block someone else from making money. But when it involved him, Luke needed to do something. The necklace Melly had given him had to be shown to someone who truly understood it, but Luke couldn't trust nobles 100%. So Lux's appearance was perfectly timed. Because even though it was Luke's first time meeting Lux, he actually already knew a bit about her. She was a girl he could trust. When Lux heard Luke's words, she hadn't expected to be needed so quickly, but she wasn't surprised either. She spoke boldly, no problem. Say it right now. I'll do everything I can. Let's find a place to sit and talk first. They found a spot where they could sit down and speak. In front of Lux, Luke didn't worry about embarrassment. He slipped his hand up under his shirt, fumbling around for a while, and inevitably exposed a bit of his stomach. Lux looked at his movements oddly. She didn't really understand what he was doing, but because of the goodwill from him helping her earlier, she didn't say anything. She just shifted her gaze to the side, looking into the distance to distract herself. Because to her, what Luke was doing at that moment looked a little like the kind of sleazy move you read about in novels. Ahem, all right. Hearing Luke's voice, Lux turned back. She saw Luke take something out from inside his clothes, something that gave off a faint, beautiful glow, sparkling brightly. It looked like a necklace, and judging by the way it looked, it was worth a fortune. Lux was a young lady from the highest tier of nobility. With one glance, she could tell the necklace in Luke's hand was extremely valuable. This necklace is really important to me, so I kept it hidden a bit carefully. Luke still offered an explanation for himself, even though he didn't need to. Lux nodded quickly. I understand. At least she could see now that Luke wasn't trying to pull anything shady. Can you tell where this necklace comes from? Luke handed it to her. The gemstone in the center shimmered with a captivating brilliance just like the girl's eyes in front of him, impossible to ignore. Lux's attention had already been drawn in. She was curious now too. Luke's clothing and manners didn't look like a noble's, yet he'd pulled out a necklace like this from his person. This is. Lux took the necklace and held it up under the sunlight, inspecting it carefully. It really was beautiful, but beyond that, it also felt a little familiar to her. Inside the gemstone, there were 3 prismatic star-like facets. It was those three facets that made her feel like she'd seen it somewhere before. I remember. No, wasn't this the symbol of House Light Shield? Lux finally pinpointed why it looked familiar. The prismatic star carved into the gem was exactly House Light Shield's emblem. She subconsciously looked at Luke. This young man, good-looking and unfamiliar, asked, "How did you get this necklace?" That answer was important. If the necklace was real, and Luke had obtained it through improper means, then its value was enough to get him killed several times over. No need to be so tense. This necklace belonged to my mother, but she's already passed away. Seeing Lux's expression, Luke could already guess this necklace was anything but simple, so he didn't hide anything. Before she died, she told me to bring it to the capital. But once I got here, I didn't know where I was supposed to go. So that's how it is. I'm sorry about your mother. Lux finished that politely, then said with confidence, "You came to the right person. What you want now is to find where this necklace came from, right?" Luke nodded. "Then come with me." Lux stood up, returned the necklace to him, and then walked forward. Her mind was already racing. House Light Shield put another way was the royal family. The necklace represented House Light Shield, and the owner of the necklace had been Luke's mother. There was definitely a story hidden in all of this. Lux was certain. Her inner gossip fiend was already blazing, determined to get to the bottom of it. "Where are we going?" Luke asked. "The royal palace." Lux's answer was simple and direct, only 2 words. Luke fell quiet, thinking. The moment he heard Light Shield, he'd felt something was off. Now it was certain this necklace really wasn't ordinary. Because even Lux looked startled the instant she took it in her hands. And she was the precious jewel of House Crownguard. No matter how valuable a necklace was, why would it be enough to surprise Miss Crownguard? So that meant Lux wasn't shocked by the necklace's price. She was shocked by what it meant. Honestly, Luke didn't feel completely steady about this either. But now, he could only steel himself and follow Lux to the palace. Chapter 7, It Feels Like Coming Home. On the way there, Luke thought about a lot of things, looking weighed down by worry. Lux, walking ahead of him, was the complete opposite. Her steps were light, her arms swinging as she walked, and she looked like she was in an excellent mood. She'd clearly already forgotten all about what happened on the street. When Luke reached the base of the Citadel of Dawn, he couldn't help but tilt his head back and stare up at the knight statue standing by the entrance. It seemed fused into one whole with the castle behind it draped in a white cloak, impossibly grand. The Citadel of Dawn was also called the Royal Palace. It was the residence of King Jarvan III, and the most important place in the capital where ministers and nobles gathered to debate and discuss affairs of state. In the sunlight, the ground was paved in white stone. Walking across it, Luke felt as if even his mood grew heavier. A patrol of soldiers marched past in neat, synchronized steps. A small number of people also moved in and out through the Citadel's entrance, and most of them clearly weren't ordinary. All in all, this was not a place a commoner like Luke was supposed to be. Lux, like a regular visitor, didn't care about the solemn atmosphere at all. She led Luke straight to the entrance at the base of the Citadel. 4 guards stood watch there. Lux put on a charming smile and greeted them warmly. "Good afternoon." Her smile was so infectious that the stern, formal air around the guards seemed to melt away, and for once they looked relaxed. One of them smiled back. "Good afternoon, Miss Crownguard. What brings you to the palace today?" They clearly weren't surprised to see her. Lux continued, "I'm here to see my aunt." "Is she here?" "If you mean Lady Tiana, she doesn't seem to have left since this morning," the guard said after thinking for a moment. Then he added, "Go on in. And the gentleman behind you is?" "My friend," Lux answered crisply, then asked a little cautiously, "Can I bring him in?" Normally, without a permit, entry isn't allowed. The guard stepped aside, still friendly. "But for you, it's not a problem. Please, go ahead." "Thank you," Lux said happily, and she led Luke inside without any trouble. In this place, her mere presence seemed to be a pass. Luke noticed that everyone seemed unusually lenient toward the blonde girl. Considering her status, it wasn't hard to understand. But there was probably another reason too. It was hard to dislike a girl who always wore a smile. No matter who she talked to, she gave off the same feeling, warm, approachable, and without any sense of distance. At least, that was the impression Luke got during their short time together. "Looks like I really did find the right person this time. Don't worry. The palace isn't some place that bites. I'm here," Lux said, noticing Luke had been much quieter along the way. She assumed the palace atmosphere was making him nervous, so she tried to reassure him. "No, it's just I have a strange feeling," Luke said slowly, his expression a little odd. Lux turned her head to look at him, curious. "What kind of feeling?" Luke let out a quiet sigh. "It feels like I'm coming home." Lux went silent for a second, then forced out a couple of laughs. Haha, that joke wasn't very funny. She thought Luke was trying to show off his sense of humor. He just wasn't quite there yet. Luke didn't respond. He simply studied the surroundings. The Citadel of Dawn really was enormous. The two of them wandered around inside for more than 10 minutes before they finally reached their destination. This seemed to be Tiana's office. Tiana was Lux's Aunt Tiana Crownguard. She was the current head of House Crownguard, and also Dematia's current High Marshal, truly the kind of person who stood above everyone except the king himself. That alone said everything about how high her position was. Lux placed her hand on the door and knocked 3 times in a steady rhythm tap, tap, tap while calling out, "Aunt, I came to see you." She waited for a moment, but there was no response. "Strange, she's not here," Lux said. She pushed the door open without hesitation and peeked inside. Sure enough, the room was empty. "Let's look somewhere else." Lux shut the door and headed off in another direction. Luke could only follow. The two of them wandered around the palace aimlessly, occasionally drawing a few surprised looks along the way. No one found Lux's presence strange, of course. What they were curious about was the man walking behind Miss Crownguard. What was he? "Miss Lux, what are you doing here?" A voice called from the side, sounding like someone who knew her. They looked over. The one greeting them was a young man wearing a short gray-black robe made of simple cloth, around 25 or 26 years old. He stood by an exit that led outside, as if he were waiting for something. Lux recognized him and greeted him back. "Good afternoon, Calvin. Have you seen my aunt?" Calvin gestured behind him. "Lady Tiana is taking a walk in the back garden with His Majesty. Lord Roy and the others are with them too. Looks like they're discussing something." Lux glanced outside but didn't see anyone, so she asked, "When are they coming out?" Calvin shook his head. "I don't know, but the lords have been in there for a while already." "All right, then." Lux looked at Luke. "We'll wait here for a bit." Luke nodded. He wasn't in a hurry. If anything, being able to reach the palace on his first day in the capital was already incredible. And on top of that, he'd gotten to ride Lux's coattails and possibly meet some of the biggest figures in Dematia. If it were just Luke alone, who knew how long he would have had to struggle and scheme before he even got close. How much trouble was he skipping by doing it this way? Calvin sized Luke up once, said nothing, and continued standing there quietly. Luke, a bit stiff, also stood in place without speaking. Only Lux seemed unable to stay still. She wandered around, looking at everything. After a while she'd go poke at the portraits on the wall, then she'd start fiddling with the suit of armor standing near the wall, then she'd wander off to tease the flowers and plants. Before long, her patience completely ran out. She really was someone who hated dull waiting, so she made a decision. "I can't wait anymore. I'm going in to take a look." Calvin smiled helplessly. "Is that really a good idea? If you interrupt those lords, I'll definitely get punished." "Relax. If anything happens, I'll take responsibility," Lux said, looking like she wasn't afraid of causing trouble at all. Then she told Luke, "You wait here for a bit. I'm just going in to take one look." Luke nodded. Seeing that, Calvin gave up on trying to stop her and let her pass as she headed into the garden. Chapter 8 Jarvan 3 and Tiana. Only Luke and Calvin were left in the corridor. After standing in silence for a while, Calvin suddenly took the initiative and asked, "What's your relationship with Miss Lux?" There was curiosity in his tone, which wasn't surprising. It was rare for anyone to see Miss Crownguard bring a man into the royal palace. "First time meeting today. I helped Miss Crownguard with something, and she's helping me a little in return," Luke answered truthfully. There was nothing to hide. "Is that so? Miss Lux is warm-hearted. That does sound like something she'd do." Calvin nodded. Then he looked Luke up and down again and asked, "Which house are you from? How come I've never seen you?" He had assumed Luke was the son of some noble house. His features fit, and he was unusually handsome. So he reached out his hand and introduced himself with pride. "Let's get acquainted. I'm Calvin, of House Cass. I serve as one of His Majesty's personal guards." The pride in his voice was obvious. Being from a noble house and already working at King Jarvan III's side at such a young age, he had every reason to feel proud. It wasn't hard to tell Calvin had some real ability. "You're too kind," Luke said as he reached out to shake his hand, giving his own introduction along the way. "I'm Luke. No family name. Just a commoner from a frontier town." "Oh." Calvin withdrew his hand blandly. The look in his eyes changed immediately, more aristocratic arrogance, more cold distance. "Let me give you a reminder. Miss Lux is kind-hearted and knave. No matter what help you're asking of her, after this is done, you'd better not keep bothering her." He'd thought Luke was a noble. Turns out he was just a nobody. What a waste of effort. Luke just smiled, unconcerned, and didn't reply. Typical noble, really. The speed at which he drew a line and put distance between them was almost impressive. That instant shift in attitude was so damn real. But it was normal too. Why would a noble want to associate with a commoner for no reason? Luke studied Calvin's expression, especially the look in his eyes, and nodded slightly to himself. After today, maybe I'll be a noble too. This kind of expression is worth learning. 3 parts chilly detachment, 3 parts mocking amusement, 4 parts casual indifference. Chin a little higher. Ideally, look down on people from the corner of your eye. From the quiet corridor outside came the sound of hurried steps, and Lux jogged back first. "They're coming over soon. When you see the king, do you know what to do?" she asked. Considering Luke's background, she couldn't help checking. On the way, she'd learned he came from a frontier town. Today was probably his first time seeing the king. Luke's first thought was an answer: "Kneel and bow my head." The corner of Calvin's mouth lifted into a scornful smile, like he was looking at an ignorant peasant. "That's a bit much," Lux said with a laugh. "Even at formal events, you don't need to kneel and bow. In an informal setting, even more so." There are a lot of variations, but just do what I do. As she spoke, she demonstrated right hand over her left chest, left hand behind her waist, then a 45-degree bow. Luke copied it properly. With his looks, it even gave him a faintly gentlemanly air. That's perfect, Luke said after making sure there was no problem, finally relaxing a little. She'd run back in the first place because she was worried Luke might make a fool of himself later. I wanted to ask my aunt first, but since it's already like this I might as well ask the person directly. Lux muttered to herself as she paced back and forth. After confirming the necklace was the real deal, her first instinct had been to find her Aunt Tiana and ask about it. But now her aunt was with King Jarvan III and the others. Even Lux didn't know what kind of consequences this might cause. Still, they were already this far. There was only one thing left to do. Hearing Lux's rambling, Luke glanced at her helplessly. He knew that at this point, they could only go through with it. Maybe what he should be thinking about now was the fallout if the necklace was fake, or if it didn't matter at all. Because the people he was about to meet were basically the biggest figures in the entire country. Luke was already starting to regret hopping onto Lux's express route straight into the palace. Way too reckless. Just then, footsteps approached in waves. Lux gave Luke a look, signaling him to be ready. Very soon, the sound of several people talking drifted over closer and closer. Luke could already make out a few silhouettes. Even with his nerves, he felt his chest tighten. The people walking toward him were the kind who could crush him with a single sentence. Lux, meanwhile, seemed like she had no idea what the word nervous even meant. She called out first, bright as ever, "Aunt, I'm over here." Hearing her voice, one of the approaching figures saw a blonde woman as well quickened her pace. By then, Luke could clearly see their faces. The blonde woman's features carried a soldier's hard edge, yet you could still tell how beautiful she must have been in her youth. Her build looked like it wouldn't lose to most men at all, her waist and back held perfectly straight like she'd been forged from steel. She was Lux's aunt, and Dematia's High Marshal, Tiana Crown Guard. "You little troublemaker," Tiana said with warmth in her eyes and a smile on her face. "I saw you sneaking along behind us earlier. Why did you run off without even saying hello?" "Because I had something else to do," Lux said with a cheeky grin. Then she greeted the others behind Tiana as well. "Jarvan, long time no see. And Lord Roy, and Lev." She waved energetically. "Mind your manners," Tiana said, rubbing Lux's head beside her. Her tone wasn't harsh. "Lux, you haven't come to the palace in a long time," said the man who spoke next. He was over 50, his white hair neatly combed back. He was dressed in elegant finery, with the temperament of a gentle middle-aged man, no overbearing aura at all. Yet he was none other than Dematia's current king, Jarvan III. His attitude toward Lux was just as kind and indulgent, as if he were looking at his own youngest daughter. Behind him were an elderly man and a middle-aged man, Roy and Lev. Luke didn't know who they were, but they were almost certainly high-ranking ministers. "Because I ran into something today that I think is really important, so I came straight to the palace." Lux explained why she was here, then looked toward Luke. Following her gaze, everyone finally noticed the young man standing off to the side. Chapter 9, Your Majesty, is this how you acknowledge a son? Luke felt like the timing was about right, so he bent forward in a bow and greeted, "Luke, greetings to Your Majesty King Jarvan III." At that moment, everyone's eyes fell on Luke. The pressure hit him all at once. It was as if his presence had shrunk smaller and smaller under their gaze. This was practically the lowest rung meeting the highest rung in a private setting like this, something that almost never happened. Even though the people in front of him weren't deliberately projecting their authority, just standing there made it feel like an uncrossable chasm had formed. Everyone present was puzzled. From what Lux had said, it sounded like something important had to do with this commoner in front of them. The question was, what kind of matter could possibly be brought directly before a king and a high marshal? Every one of these people was swamped with affairs of state, with endless decisions waiting for them. Under normal circumstances, who would ever spend time on a random commoner? But Lux rarely did something this abrupt. This well-behaved, clever girl had been adored by Jarvan III since she was little, so he naturally indulged her. Spending a bit of time for her sake was hardly an issue. "Child, lift your head," Jarvan III said gently, looking at the young man before him. Luke raised his head at the sound of his voice. As that face slowly came into Jarvan III's view, the king froze. Seeing Luke's face, a powerful sense of familiarity rose in his chest like he'd seen him somewhere before. Not a vague impression, either, but something that had left a deep mark. And as his gaze settled on Luke's eyes, that feeling only grew stronger. He looked too much like someone. Jarvan III couldn't make sense of it. "Have we met before?" "Your Majesty, I have never met you before," Luke answered respectfully. After all, the man in front of him was the ruler of this country. If Luke offended him in the slightest, one sentence might be enough to make him vanish from the world. Jarvan III was said to be a benevolent king, but Luke wasn't about to bet his life on reputation alone. His heart wasn't steady right now. He was trying to figure out how to bring up the necklace. Lux had already stepped forward, her expression serious. "I'll explain." She felt that since she had brought Luke here, she had to see it through. "Take it out," Lux signaled him with her eyes, then began explaining. "Luke showed me a necklace, and then I realized I'd seen a necklace exactly like it in a portrait here in the palace. Before Lux could continue, Tiana lifted a hand in front of her, signaling that she could stop. Because the matter was nowhere near as complicated as Lux and Luke had imagined. All they had needed to do from the beginning was show the necklace. Lux saw Jarvan III staring at the necklace in Luke's hand, frozen in place, lost in thought like a statue. Even the well-informed Minister Roy behind him looked shocked. And when she glanced at her aunt, Tiana's expression had turned visibly more serious, no longer as relaxed as before. Calvin could also clearly feel the change in the atmosphere the moment this guy took the necklace out. Calvin couldn't help shooting Luke a startled look. Was it really that big of a deal? That necklace, could you let me see it? Jarvan III's voice suddenly went hoarse as he held out his hand. Or maybe it wasn't hoarseness, maybe he simply couldn't force his voice louder in that moment. Luke handed it over, feeling more and more that something was off. Jarvan III held the necklace and examined it painstakingly closely, then ran his fingers along the patterns etched into the gemstone. His eyes suddenly grew wet as he asked in a rush, Where did you find this necklace? Where is its owner? Where is she? Why is it in your hands? A barrage of questions spilled out, and Jarvan III even stepped toward Luke. Lux felt like the situation had just exploded. She had never seen Jarvan III like this, not once. In her memory, the king had always been unshakably calm. But now he seemed like a different person entirely, his presence turning restless and anxious out of nowhere. Your Majesty, the owner of the necklace is my mother, Luke said. Even Luke was startled by the king's urgency and instinctively stepped back 2 paces. Your mother. Jarvan III froze again, then asked urgently, then where is she? Where is she now? My mother passed away 2 months ago, Luke replied. As soon as those words fell, Jarvan III's vision swam. It was as if all strength had been drained from him at once. He stumbled back a few steps, and the man named Lev hurried forward to support him. You avoided me for so many years, and the only news you were willing to give me was that you were dead. Jarvan III forced himself to recover a little, shook off Lev's support, and stepped forward again. He looked up at Luke, who was now slightly taller than him, with a complicated expression. That's why you felt familiar the moment I saw you. I can still see her face when she was young in yours. Luke felt incredibly uncomfortable under that gaze. Jarvan III was looking at him the way someone looks at a lover, and it sent a wave of goosebumps over Luke's skin. Your Majesty, did you know my mother? Luke asked, stepping back again despite himself. Know her? Jarvan III caught himself and reassembled the bearing of a king, though his eyes were filled with age and grief. You said you're her son, yes. Luke nodded. Tenderness surfaced in Jarvan III's eyes. He looked at Luke kindly, almost gently. Then you are also my son. What? Luke's head instantly filled with question marks. How did he suddenly gain a father out of nowhere? Aside from the elderly Roy, who didn't seem surprised at all, and Tiana, who wore a complicated, resigned expression, everyone else present widened their eyes in shock. What the hell? Calvin practically thought he'd misheard. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Your Majesty, are you really just recognizing sons like this? What about me? I'm amazing at being a son. Lux's mouth fell slightly open. She felt like she just stumbled onto a world-shaking piece of gossip. And more than that, this gossip was something Lux herself had personally set in motion. Lev was the current commander of the Dauntless Vanguard, someone who had risen through the ranks step by step, so he didn't know the full context. He couldn't help asking, Your Majesty, what do you mean? How did a son just appear out of nowhere? Seemingly unconcerned with how explosive his words were, Jarvan III sank into memory as he spoke. Everyone knows how deeply I loved Catherine. After she died, I swore that I would never marry again in this lifetime. Chapter 10 What happened back then? Catherine Ireland, born into House Ireland, was King Jarvan III's wife, the queen of this nation. And she was also the mother of that hero, Dematia's Prince Jarvan IV. This short-lived woman died from complications during childbirth, but she left Jarvan III an heir. As far as people knew, from that point on Jarvan III never took another wife, and he had only that single child, Jarvan IV. But even with that vow hanging over me, I still broke it. Jarvan III's expression carried a faint, painful strain as his sorrowful eyes drifted toward the garden outside, as if he still couldn't accept that both of the women he'd loved had died, one after the other. He had loved Catherine. After Catherine passed, he truly intended never to marry again, and he believed he would keep that promise for life. But he was wrong. Love was like a master key, always able to pry open a heart that had locked itself shut. Her appearance was like a gentle breeze that blew straight into my chest, Jarvan III continued, lost in memory. When that child was 3 years old, Nakas grew greedy for our frontier. They joined forces with enemies beyond the border and launched an attack on Dematia. That year, I had just put an end to the nobles' internal strife when I had to hurriedly don armor once again, leading troops to the border to meet the enemy. That battle was when Xian Zhao and I first met. The story of how Sovereign and Retainer came to know one another is still praised in folk songs to this day. But what people don't know is that during that same time, I also met someone else. Your mother Melly. As he said it, Jarvan III turned his gaze to Luke. Hearing Melly's name spoken from the king's own mouth sent Luke's emotions surging all over again. Before this, he hadn't told anyone the name Melly. So it was real. She was a medic forcibly conscripted by Nakus. In that battle, the dauntless vanguard and I were scattered by the enemy's assault. A handful of my personal guards and I managed to break through, but in the process I was badly injured. On the way back, I met her. Melly refused to become a pawn for the invaders, so she escaped from Naka's. When I found her, she was crying as she treated a soldier who was on the verge of death. My men took her for an enemy and brought her to me, but in her stubborn eyes I could see the soul of a kind person. After that, I kept her with us. Along the road, she cared for me and every wounded soldier with tireless devotion. Day after day, little by little, I realized the heart I'd buried for so long had begun to loosen again. After saying so much in one breath, Jarvan III couldn't hide the grief on his face. Everyone present listened quietly, stunned that such a story had unfolded back then. Even now, I still remember her expression when we regrouped with the army and she learned who I was. She looked terrified, like she'd been frightened out of her wits. After that, she didn't dare to see me for a long time. I sealed that loosened heart away again until one day we met on the battlefield once more. She wore armor, clumsy and heavy, weaving through the chaos with a medical kit in hand, saving the wounded without regard for her own safety. An enemy arrow nearly took her life at the last moment I cut it out of the air. She was so frightened that she collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. And even then, she pulled herself together quickly and returned to her work. By then, the battle was already nearing its end. Not long after, we won. Later, I went to find her of my own accord and at that moment, I had already realized I had fallen in love with her. It didn't seem like something he found shameful to admit. Jarvan III said it openly. He faced the truth of breaking his vow with complete honesty. After that, Nakus withdrew. I brought her back to the capital. I wanted to pledge myself to her. I wanted the nation to witness the marriage. I wanted her to become the new queen. However, back then, many people opposed it. Almost no one supported me. They didn't want to see their king break the vow he had once sworn. Even more so, they didn't want to trust a woman who wasn't even Dematia. Inevitably, both she and I came under tremendous pressure. What I regret to this day is that at the time, I failed to realize the pressure she carried was far heavier than mine. Not long after, she left behind a letter and she left me. In it, she said she would leave Dematia and return to the homeland she once knew. I used everything at my disposal to search for her, but it was as if she vanished from my world entirely. For a very long time, I couldn't get a single answer. I never gave up looking for her, yet I never heard anything from her again. When he finished, long tear tracks ran down Jarvan III's face. In his entire life, he had loved only 2 women and in his heart, both had been flawless. Yet as a king, he hadn't been able to give either of them a happy life. It was as if, from the very beginning, his love had been destined to end in tragedy. "That's so moving," Lux murmured, eyes reddened. She had gotten the earth-shaking scoop she wanted, but the aftertaste hit hard. In her head, she'd already spun out a romance epic hundreds of thousands of words long. Melly had to be the kind of woman worth breaking a vow for, but judging by how things ended, the two of them ultimately still hadn't made it to the end together. After hearing the story, Lev didn't know what to say for a moment. As for Tiana and Roy, the two of them could confirm it was true because they had been there back then. Calvin was completely stunned. As one of Jarvan III's personal guards, being able to hear this kind of secret firsthand really was a kind of good fortune. And then, all of a sudden, he remembered something. He glanced at Luke, who was standing there in a daze, and there was only one thought in his head that he didn't know whether he should say out loud. Just what kind of absurd luck did this guy have to turn out to be the king's illegitimate son? The moment he thought about the attitude he'd shown Luke earlier, Calvin felt awful. Luke himself was also a little lost. At first, he'd only assumed Melly was some noble lady who had run away with a lover. He never expected it to be this. His mother had actually shared a tangled love story with Dematia's king. Jarvan III walked toward Luke and asked softly, his hand reaching out, "How old are you?" 18, Luke answered. This time, Luke didn't dodge. He let Jarvan III's hands rest on his shoulders, those hands trembling slightly. "Already this grown," Jarvan III murmured, tears welling again. "That means the year she left me, she was already pregnant. All these years, how did she live? How did she endure it? In a land where she had no roots and no familiarity, raising newborn Luke alone, just imagining it made Jarvan III feel the weight of that hardship. Luke didn't actually know much about Melly's past, but that didn't stop him from giving this story a moving continuation. He lowered his head slightly, steadying his voice as much as he could before speaking. 11, Chapter 11, I'm the worst. 11, Chapter 11, I'm the worst. For all these years mother never actually left Dematia. When I was little, there were so many things I didn't understand. In my blurry memories, I can still vaguely remember whenever the marching bards sang praises of the Dematian king's valor, mother would always gaze out the window and smile like a fool." Luke seemed to sink into the past as he sketched the scene he had once witnessed as a child. A black-haired woman sat by the window. Outside, the bards in the street spoke loudly of the king's stories, and she wore a blissful smile. Year after year, it was as if simply hearing news about him was enough to satisfy her. She never tried to hide the love in her heart, even though the man she loved was separated from her by mountains and seas. Jarvan III froze in place. His hands trembled even more violently, betraying the turmoil in his heart. She never left Dematia. All these years, she had been right under his nose, and he like a blind man had failed to notice her. Regret. A fierce, crushing regret surged up inside him. Lux still hadn't recovered from the last story. Now she was hearing a new one, and it hit even harder. Damn it, are adult love stories always this moving? When I was little, I often saw other children walking by with their parents' hands in theirs, so I asked Mother where my father was. Mother would just smile and say my father was a hero without equal. And because he was a hero, he was always too busy, so we had to support him quietly. Later, as I gradually grew up and became more sensible, I stopped asking. By the time he reached that point, Jarvan III was already weeping openly. He looked at Luke with unbearable shame, eat the flesh and blood standing before him. There was no doubt. He was his son. And yet, as a father, he had never let him feel a father's love all these years. In Melly's heart, he had been so great, and the more he thought about it, the heavier the guilt and remorse in his chest fell, like the snows of deep winter. Jarvan III said hoarsely, full of self-reproach, all these years you've suffered. Luke lowered his head and forced himself to hold it in, but not a single tear fell. All he could do was say in grief, actually, I didn't suffer at all. Mother treated me well. She taught me a lot about how the world works, and she never let me be wronged. The one who truly suffered was her. Because she had no proof of identity, Mother could only do the lowest, most degrading hard labor. Sometimes she'd help treat people's illnesses, too, but the wages she earned each week were only enough to keep us fed and barely warm. That's how the two of us got through year after year. But a healer can't heal themselves. By the time Mother realized what was wrong inside her body, it was already too late. 10 years ago, Mother fell ill with a disease. She coughed constantly, year-round. Sometimes she even coughed up blood. The physician said it came from years of exhaustion and heavy work. The later it got, the worse the pain became. It would stay with her until the day she died. But she endured the torment of that illness and still raised me to adulthood. And in the later years, I took care of her. What I regret is that as her son I still couldn't give her a happy, peaceful old age. I could only watch her suffer, powerless to do anything. 2 months ago, Mother passed away. Before she left, she gave me the necklace and told me to go to the capital. She said she'd lived her whole life openly, without shame, and the only thing she regretted was leaving without a word back then. She still had more to say, but she couldn't finish before she died. Luke wasn't lying. He had added a tiny bit of his own framing, but from the shattered fragments of memory he had seen, Melly really had lived like that all these years. If it hadn't been that way, the original owner of this body probably wouldn't have collapsed under the pressure and, when his mother was gravely ill, chosen to leap off a cliff and end his life. Now, Luke had become him. On the way here, he had thought through so many things she just hadn't expected that before he'd even done anything, the race of his life would already be finished in a single stride. He'd assumed he was just some minor noble. But instead the royal family turned out to be me. Luke's mindset shifted in a subtle way at that very moment. Not a single tear could be squeezed out, maybe because Luke couldn't fully slip into it. In truth, he hadn't actually lived through many bitter days himself. But in everyone else's eyes, that sorrowful young man was pitiful beyond words. They could imagine how hard it must have been for him to grow up, and they could imagine how brutal and exhausting his mother's life had been. To them, Luke had already cried himself numb. This child must have once wailed for his departed mother until there were no tears left to shed. Jarvan III's tears still didn't stop. He could practically see Melly working the roughest jobs to raise their child, suffering cold stares and contempt because she had no papers. He could also imagine the torment of her illness, how much she must have needed him by her side then. And yet he hadn't done it. And after all that, he still dared to claim he loved her. Just thinking of it made Jarvan III feel as if his heart were about to explode from pain. He could even imagine Luke crying at Melly's grave, helpless, perhaps believing that from that day on, he had no family left in this world. Jarvan III desperately wanted to tell the child, You do have family. Your father is right here. But at this moment, Jarvan III was choking so hard on sobs that he couldn't force out a single complete sentence. Your Majesty, try to rein in your emotions. Tiana Crown Guard sighed, patting Jarvan III's back in comfort. At least he's standing safely in front of you. Even she couldn't help but feel sympathy for Luke after hearing a story like that. Melly Tiana knew her. Back then, they had even spoken before. That woman truly had been as kind as Jarvan III said. But someone so kind still hadn't gotten a good ending. As a woman, Tiana could only respect her all the more. I'm fine. Jarvan III steadied himself. Hearing Tiana's words, light returned to his eyes. Yes. At the very least, this child was still alive, still able to stand before him, safe and whole. He had come here, it had to be a sign from the heavens. Looking at the necklace in his hand, Jarvan III was certain this child had returned carrying Melly's wish. She wanted him to take good care of their child. Lux wiped at the corners of her eyes. She hadn't expected Luke's life to be this miserable. And then, thinking of herself growing up with her father and mother's love, from now on, she had to treat him better. She admired Melly even more, admired how great she was, raising Luke through all those hardships, suffering silently for so many years. Calvin was feeling awful listening to it. This kid had really lived that painfully, and then there was him, growing up without a worry in the world, having whatever he wanted, hands reached out and everything was placed right into them. Thinking back to how he'd treated Luke earlier, Calvin regretted it. I'm the worst. 12, Chapter 12, Prove Your Identity. Your Majesty, are you ready? Roy spoke up at that moment. Truthfully, even as he asked, he already had an answer in his heart. Everything had happened far too suddenly. Jarvan III's son from 18 years ago had appeared out of nowhere. Before today, he had never even imagined such a situation, yet it had undeniably happened. As one of those who had opposed Jarvan III and Melly's marriage back then, Roy had never believed he was wrong. In the eyes of the people, Jarvan III was a myth made flesh. If that was the case, then there should be no blemish, no stain upon him at all. He simply hadn't expected what would come afterward. Now, the same situation had appeared again, and Roy knew very clearly that this time, he couldn't stop it. Yes. Jarvan III had recovered a bit of strength, his gaze firm with resolve. I know what happened back then can never be made right, but this time, I won't run from it again. I will let every Dematian know her. Luke's appearance forced Jarvan III to see the coward he used to be all over again. If, back then, he had been just a little braver, if he had ignored everyone's opposition and openly acknowledged Melly's identity, would the ending have been different? Jarvan III didn't know. But the man standing here today was no longer who he had been then. This time, he wouldn't evade it again even if everyone still opposed him. As your subject, I have to say this much, Roy said slowly, his eyes drifting toward Luke. I won't advise your Majesty to reconsider. Then his tone tightened. But before that, it would be best to confirm his identity. When everyone was a little lost and unsteady, he had to stay clear-headed. Yes, Luke had brought the necklace. Yes, he had told Melly's story. But none of that alone could prove Luke was truly Jarvan III's flesh and blood. Luke understood immediately. So they still had to verify him? How? A blood test. Come with me. Jarvan III lifted his eyes to Roy, said nothing more, and left only those words before walking ahead at an unhurried pace. He knew exactly what Roy was thinking, nothing more than a final struggle. If Luke were an imposter, then what happened today would never leave this room. But how could Jarvan III not know? Luke couldn't possibly be an imposter. The shape of his brows and eyes resembled Melly far too much. So much so that, at first glance, Jarvan III had been struck dumb. Luke steadied himself and followed behind. There was no doubt the next step was going to be proving who he was. To be honest, he was a little uncertain too. What if Melly had picked him up somewhere? They walked for about 10 minutes. No one said a single word along the way. Jarvan III led them into a hall. A statue stood at the entrance, different from the ones Luke had seen on the way here. Most of those had been knight statues. But here, at this doorway, stood a statue of a nun. If he remembered right, Dematians worshipped the goddess of light. She was the faith in people's hearts. Since the founding of the nation, the order of the goddess of light had risen and fallen alongside the kingdom. And equally renowned was another divine figure, the winged protector, representing justice and fairness, the living embodiment of Dematia's laws. To Dematians, neither stood above the other. Both could give them hope. Judging from the nun statue's robes, she was likely a follower of the goddess of light. They entered the hall. The light inside was soft and warm. In the center stood another statue, a goddess in sacred vestments, eyes closed, cradling a perfectly round orb in her hands. And that orb was real. When the Order of Light was first established, Jarvan III explained as he stood before the statue, the first light bringer, to ensure the purity of the royal bloodline, gifted Dematia's founding king an orb of light. This orb is bound to his bloodline. Only those who carry royal blood can awaken its dazzling radiance. As he spoke, he slowly placed his hand on the orb. The instant his palm touched it, the orb began to give off a gentle glow. Then the light grew brighter, so bright it seemed to blend with the sunlight throughout the entire hall. Jarvan III withdrew his hand. The radiance faded, and the orb returned to normal. Child, place your hand on it. Then he looked at Luke. Luke stepped forward 2 paces. Under everyone's gaze, he raised his hand and placed it on the orb, his heartbeat speeding up despite himself. But soon, just like with Jarvan II, the orb began to shine, exactly the same as before. Luke quietly let out a breath of relief. If it had proven him fake, that would have been beyond awkward. Seeing that, everyone finally had certainty. Luke was truly of royal blood. Jarvan III looked at Roy. Now, are you satisfied? Since that is the case, this old man is naturally willing to acknowledge your highness's status as prince. Roy brought his hands together and bowed to Luke in the manner of a subject. Lev followed immediately after. Then Tiana Crown Guard, then Calvin. Even Lux performed a proper bow to Luke. His identity was beyond question now. As true royal blood, Jarvan III's flesh and blood, he was more than worthy of that salute. With that settled, the royal bloodline truly should not be left outside, Roy said. And the people deserve an explanation. He didn't say anything else, already thinking about what came next. As a loyal supporter of the crown, even he believed royal blood should never be wandering in the world. Since Luke was truly a prince, then his identity should be known by the public just as Jarvan IV's was. At that moment, Lux secretly put her hand on the orb too. Nothing happened, no matter how long she waited. Only then did she suddenly realize. The person she'd bumped into on the street today, by pure chance, was actually the king's son, the one he'd never met. That was almost too unbelievable. Jarvan III looked at Luke, his gaze complicated. Between them, they were the closest of strangers. They shared the thickest bond of blood, yet in 18 years, they had never met. He didn't even have the courage to make this child call him father. Everyone present noticed the complexity in Jarvan III's eyes. They understood the pain in his heart. At this point, with the atmosphere like this, that word was unavoidable. Luke knew it was on him to break the deadlock. He hesitated for a long moment, met Jarvan III's eyes, and finally spoke, slowly and clearly. Father. These years you've suffered. The wrinkles at Jarvan III's eyes were wet. He pulled Luke into a tight embrace. From this day forward, you won't be alone in this world. I will be your steadfast support. Even Luke, with his usually shameless, playful mindset, went quiet in that moment. Because he could feel it. The emotion in the man's chest was real, without the slightest hint of falsehood. Maybe facing this bond with nothing but a joking attitude had been wrong. No matter what. In this life, the man before him was his family. Chapter 13. Already using the noble tricks I just learned. Everything that happened today had been far too sudden, and the amount of information pouring in all at once was overwhelming. It left Jarvan III utterly exhausted. The news of Melly's death hit him hard. For all these years, he had never forgotten her. Every sleepless night spent tossing and turning, he would see his beloved's face again. And yet she was gone. Jarvan III was tired. He urgently wanted to be alone, to sit in silence for a while. After instructing Calvin to take care of Luke and arrange temporary lodgings for him inside the palace, Jarvan III let Lev support him as he went to rest. Minister Roy took his leave as well. Naturally, he had matters to handle, gathering the other ministers and jointly discussing when Luke's identity as a prince should be made public. As for Lux and Tiana Crown Guard, after saying goodbye to Luke, they also left the palace. The two of them walked along the road. Lux suddenly remembered something and couldn't help muttering to herself, so it really is his home. She'd honestly thought it was just a joke at the time. But in the end, there'd been such a massive twist. This enormous palace really was Luke's home. Tiana walked ahead. Hearing Lux's muttering, she turned back with a smile. What are you whispering about now? Today, you gave Jarvan III one heck of a surprise. More than a surprise, calling it a shock wouldn't be an exaggeration. Her niece had essentially hauled in a living, breathing bomb. This isn't my fault. Auntie, eat first. I wanted to bring him to you first. Lux hadn't expected it to be this big either. Then she added, besides, isn't a father and son reuniting a good thing? Of course it is. Tiana ruffled Lux's hair, smiling the entire time, then asked curiously, so tell me, how did you just so happen to run into our kingdom's second prince? Ahem, then I have to talk about how he and I teamed up to crack a scam ring. Lux cleared her throat, and the story came pouring out like she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. The two of us had never met before, but we had an extraordinary level of unspoken coordination. First, I went deep into the scam ring's trap, while he hid off to the side, quietly observing their tricks. With the two of us working together flawlessly, the scammers fled in panic. Miss Crownguard didn't blush, didn't blink, didn't flinch, though when her aunt's smiling eyes looked over, Lux suddenly found it a little hard to hold eye contact. So something like that happened. Tiana looked at her adorable niece and laughed. If I remember correctly, didn't your mother send you to tutoring? How did you end up chasing scam artists instead? The moment Lux heard that, her entire body stiffened, freezing on the spot. Oh nah, she'd completely forgotten about that. Don't look at me with those puppy eyes. I can't help you. Tiana sighed. If I had to guess, she's already heard that you skipped tutoring. Just tell her I did something really important today. You know what your mother is like. That doesn't change the fact that you skipped tutoring. Then maybe we can stay overnight in the palace today. Lux, running away won't solve anything. Wah. At the same time, inside the palace. In the corridor, only Luke and Calvin remained. As a royal guard who worked at the king's side, Calvin naturally knew the palace well. His assignment was to settle Luke in properly. And the more he thought about it, the more unsettled he felt. Someone he dismissed as a commoner without even wanting to spare him a glance had, in the span of 30 minutes, undergone the most dramatic identity change imaginable. Calvin's emotions couldn't help but rise and fall. Most importantly, if possible, he desperately wanted Luke to forget what happened earlier. After thinking it over, Calvin still forced himself to speak first. Your Highness, I know all of this must feel extremely sudden. You may need some time to adjust to your new identity. If there's anything you want to ask, you can say it directly. No need. I don't have anything to ask. Luke replied, looking at Calvin with casual indifference. He reached out and patted Calvin's shoulder. But, Cal. Calvin blanked for a second, then coughed lightly. Ahem. Please go on, Your Highness. I really admire capable young people like you. The future of our nation will depend on people like you. You're staying by father's side, so I'm hoping you'll help shoulder his burdens for him. Luke patted his shoulder again. In his eyes, there was just the right amount of cool detachment, just the right amount of mocking amusement, and just the right amount of effortless nonchalance. Calvin was left staring, stunned. With his status, if some random commoner dared to look at him like that, he would have slapped them on the spot. But now, all he could do was grin awkwardly and nod. Your Highness is right. I'll do everything in my power to assist His Majesty. 30 minutes ago, it was sir. Now it was Cal every other sentence. Damn it, these guy adapted to his status way too fast. If a normal person learned something like this, they'd be overwhelmed, at a loss for what to do next. But this guy, he looked like he'd been a prince for 18 years. Absurd. Completely absurd. Calvin couldn't wrap his head around the fact that something this ridiculous could even happen. With barely any time at all, someone from the lowest rung of commoners had become a noble prince. Cal, lead the way. I'm a bit tired. Luke clasped his hands behind his back and strolled ahead like he was taking a leisurely walk. This world really was something else. Who would have thought that noble essence he just learned from Calvin would come in handy this quickly? How did that saying go again? One moment you look down on me, the next moment you're not even worthy to look up at me. Please follow me, Your Highness. In the end, Calvin still lowered the proud head he'd held high before, walking ahead to guide him. The palace was enormous. As Luke walked, he couldn't help feeling a little wistful. Just thinking about how, in the future, even walking out the front door would take over 10 minutes was honestly kind of depressing. Calvin led Luke out of the main building of Dawning Castle. They took a small path leading toward the gardens, circled around a few times, and stopped at the base of another building. Your Highness, we're here. Calvin took out a ring of keys and opened the door. You'll rest here for now. This was the residence Prince Jarvan IV lived in before he came of age. After he left the palace, it's been left unused, but it's still cleaned regularly. Luke stepped inside. The furnishings weren't particularly luxurious, everything looked fairly ordinary. But the place was definitely spacious, and it was clean and neatly kept. Calvin continued, the bedroom is on the second floor. I'll arrange for servants to stand by outside. If you need anything, just say the word. I understand. You can go. Luke waved a hand, then casually sat down on the sofa, feeling the exhaustion surge up all at once. Calvin left quickly, and before he went, he pulled the door shut behind him. Chapter 14 The Seneschal of Dematia. Luke finally had a moment to be alone. He sorted through the chaotic mess of information in his head and couldn't help letting out a long breath. What would happen next, even Luke couldn't say for sure. For now, all he could do was take things one step at a time. At the very least, it seemed he was already ahead of a lot of people by a wide margin. If possible, Luke wanted to become stronger. Sitting on the sofa, he drifted off before he even realized it. What woke him was a rhythmic knocking at the door. Whoever it was didn't seem to intend to barge in, just a steady, measured knock, quiet and unintrusive. Luke opened his eyes, still a little groggy, got up, walked to the door, and pulled it open. Standing outside was a black-haired man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He stood perfectly straight, wearing a white-collared garment. His dark hair and dark eyes were striking, and his gaze, like that of a seasoned general who had survived countless battlefields, seemed full of stories. If there was anyone in Dematia who was easiest to recognize, it was probably the man in front of him. I, Xin Zhao, pay my respects to Your Highness the Prince. Xin Zhao lowered his head and bowed. His voice was firm and resonant. Seneschal Xin Zhao, please rise. Luke didn't dare put on airs in front of him. Even as a prince, he still needed to show Xin Zhao proper respect. For one simple reason, the man before him was known as the Seneschal of Dematia. Not only was he a familiar champion, but the title alone made his standing in Dematia obvious. Dematia was often shortened to Dematia, and a man who could become its seneschal would never be insignificant. On top of that, Xin Zhao was also Jarvan III's personal bodyguard, one of the strongest warriors in all of Dematia. The story of the two of them had been passed down among the people for years. For as long as Xin Zhao was present, every assassination attempt against Jarvan III had failed. No one had even managed to scratch him. Xin Zhao wasn't Dematian by birth, yet he had earned unanimous recognition from the nation from top to bottom, which spoke volumes about how extraordinary he was. Come in. Let's talk inside. Luke stepped aside and headed into the room. Xin Zhao didn't say much, entering with him. The two sat facing each other. Luke spoke first. Seneschal Xin Zhao, what brings you here? I came for 2 reasons. Xin Zhao looked at Luke and let out a sigh. The first is to offer a belated apology. To you and to Meli. Luke knew Xin Zhao wouldn't stop there, so he sat quietly and waited. Allowing royal blood to wander outside the palace for more than 18 years was my failure. Xin Zhao's tone was complicated, heavy with emotion. At the beginning, I was already at His Majesty's side as his guard. She fled from Nakus alone, with nowhere to rely on. When I saw her, I felt sympathy, and I treated her like my younger sister. Her love with His Majesty, I was involved in it as well. Back then, I thought it wasn't a bad thing. If I had known it would harm her later, perhaps I would have stopped His Majesty from the start. After that, His Majesty brought her back to the capital. What happened next you already know. After she left behind that letter and disappeared, I wanted to search for her. But at the time, the king had returned victorious. The whole nation was celebrating. Countless people had gathered in the capital. I couldn't guarantee that if I left, the king would remain safe. That brief hesitation made me miss the best chance to find her. Later, I sent people to search, but there were no results. His voice was filled with self-blame. The bond between him and Melly had been like that of siblings, yet he had failed to fulfill the responsibility of an older brother. Xin Zhao believed things turning out this way was his fault. Honestly, I don't have the right to speak in Mother's place. After hearing him out, Luke thought for a moment and said, but I think if Mother were still alive, she wouldn't blame you. Because in my eyes, the choice back then was hers to make. Even when she was tormented by illness all the way to her last moment, she never regretted making that decision. Thank you for your words. But wrong is wrong. I won't run from it. Xin Zhao like Jarvan I could faintly see Melly in Luke's brows and eyes. He sighed again. Where is she now? Luke replied, I buried Mother to the east, in a place called Terran Town. I bought her a plot in the cemetery there. Hearing that, Xin Zhao stood up and walked outside. Several men in white armor stood there, their status clearly not ordinary. Did you all hear what His Highness said? Xin Zhao's expression turned stern as he addressed them. His Highness's mother should not sleep there. She should return to the capital, return to where her beloved and her son are. We will safely escort the queen to her destination. The white-armored soldiers dropped to one knee, fists clasped in salute. As soon as they finished speaking, they rose and left at once without looking back. They had a new mission now to bring back the queen who had never been formally recognized. Xin Zhao returned to the room and stood beside Luke. The second matter is that His Majesty asked me to take a look at your Highness's physique. I'll have to trouble you to stand. Luke stood up, not quite sure what was coming next. Xin Zhao was already moving. He reached out, checking Luke's back, under his ribs, the side of his waist, then his arm bones and leg bones. She even had Luke take off his shoes and pressed and examined his feet as well. Luke let him do as he pleased, and he could already guess what this was. After a moment, Xin Zhao straightened up. Under Luke's expectant gaze, he sighed softly. Unfortunately, your Highness's body has mostly finished developing, and from the look of it, your aptitude is on the poorer side. What he was testing was whether Luke could still learn martial training, whether it was still possible, whether it was still in time. After all, Dematia honored strength. As a prince, if he could become stronger, that would naturally be a good thing. But now it seemed it was already too late to train properly. Perhaps it was because he had been malnourished since birth. When Xin Zhao thought of that, guilt surged in him again. A woman without proof of identity in Dematia, carrying a newborn, how could she possibly have lived well? Compared to Jarvan IV, Luke's physique was lacking by an entire world. Jarvan IV's talent and aptitude were exceptional. And with the careful royal upbringing he had received since childhood, he already possessed considerable strength. But Luke, also a prince, had lived a hard life from the moment he was young, not to mention how he could have had the time or conditions to learn martial skills. Hearing this, Luke understood the implication and couldn't help feeling disappointed. He knew what kind of world this was. If it were an ordinary world, who cared if he didn't have talent for martial training? As a prince, he could still live comfortably without worries. But this was Runeterra. A world where, without strength, you could become cannon fodder at any moment. Even as a prince, when the great disasters of the future arrived, he still might be powerless. Your Highness, don't be discouraged. Pursuing scholarship is also a fine path. And besides, once your living conditions improve, it's not impossible that changes could be made. Some things can be made up for. Seeing the disappointment in Luke's eyes, Xin Zhao did his best to comfort him, though in truth, the chances weren't great. Chapter 15, Jarvan 4. You don't need to comfort me. I know my own limits. Luke let out a sigh. There wasn't much he could do about it. He couldn't exactly expect to be some once-in-10,000 martial prodigy. And growing up malnourished, honestly, just staying alive until now was already no small feat. Let's not dwell on that. We can figure it out slowly over time. Xin Zhao immediately steered the conversation away. His Majesty has prepared dinner and is waiting in the dining hall. Please come with me. Luke nodded and followed Xin Zhao out. On the way, Xin Zhao added, Prince Jarvan IV has also heard the news. He should be arriving soon. After learning he has a younger brother, he seemed very excited. When I found out I still had family, I was excited too. Luke smiled, though a large part of that excitement came from discovering his bloodline wasn't ordinary. Hearing that, Xin Zhao's feelings turned complicated again, filled with sympathy for this unfortunate child. Luke had probably once truly believed he had no family at all. Jarvan IV was also a famed hero, the Prince of Dematia. Just from the title, it was obvious he was Luke's older brother, the child of Queen Catherine Ireland and Jarvan III. In fact, Jarvan IV and Luke shared something in common throughout their lives. Both had lacked the love of someone crucial. On the day Jarvan IV was born, Queen Catherine Ireland died from complications in childbirth. From that day on, Jarvan IV lost his mother. And Luke, because Melly left on her own back then, he had spent all these years not even knowing who his father was. But in a sense, Jarvan IV was still luckier than Luke. Because he was the legitimate prince, raised under the protection of the royal family since childhood. Xin Zhao led Luke all the way to the dining hall. Night had already fallen, but a gentle glow spilled from that direction. When Luke stepped inside, it looked exactly like what he'd imagined, one of those long rectangular tables from films and dramas, covered with all kinds of lavish dishes. At the head seat, Jarvan III sat there. There was still worry and sorrow lingering in his eyes, but when he saw Luke enter, he stood up and forced a small smile. Luke took the initiative to bow. "Father." Jarvan III said gently, "When there are no outsiders, don't worry about formalities. Sit. If you're hungry, you don't need to wait for your brother eat first." Luke sat down in the seat before him. The tempting aroma instantly stirred his appetite. He didn't bother being polite and said, "Then, father, I'll start." He really was hungry. He'd barely eaten all day. Jarvan III nodded. Watching Luke dig into the food in big bites, a hint of warmth appeared in his eyes. He liked Luke's personality. He wouldn't be shackled by so-called rules in the future, and that was a good thing. Waiting until everyone arrived before eating was a common rule in many places, and the nobles did it too. But here, with him, it didn't have to exist. This entire table had been prepared for Luke. If Luke didn't eat, what was the point? If anything, Jarvan III had been worried Luke would be too stiff and force himself to hold back. Half an hour later, a hurried set of footsteps sounded from outside. If nothing unexpected happened, it was Prince Jarvan IV. Luke rubbed his very full stomach, relieved he hadn't put on a show earlier. Otherwise, sitting there for half an hour smelling the food while starving would have been pure torture. "Sorry I am late. Father, where's my brother?" Jarvan IV rushed in wearing royal attire. You could see a clear resemblance to Jarvan II Ishurp, defined features, bright eyes, and an impressive presence. As he spoke, Jarvan IV immediately spotted Luke, who had already risen to greet him. He strode over, visibly excited, and also a little embarrassed as he said, "I'm Jarvan IV. I'm 4 years older than you, so I'll take the liberty of calling you my brother. I came in a hurry and didn't prepare a proper gift to meet you with. Sorry about that." He was a bit taller than Luke, broad-shouldered, and his gaze toward Luke was genuinely warm. Luke laughed openly. "Brother, what are you saying? There's no need for gifts." "No." Jarvan IV's tone was firm. "This is the first time I've ever had a real brother. How could I not prepare something? Then by that logic, it's also the first time I've had a real brother, so shouldn't I prepare a gift too?" Luke said. "If we both give gifts, they cancel out, so we don't need to give anything to each other." Jarvan IV froze for a second. It actually sounded pretty reasonable. He thought about it, then nodded. "Yeah, that checks out." Jarvan III stood up at that moment and said with a smile, "Looks like you two can get along well. I won't say much more. I'm tired today. Go talk as brothers. I'll leave you to it." He and Luke had already talked some. Seeing Luke and Jarvan IV click so easily, he finally felt at ease. "Rest well, father," Jarvan IV and Luke said in unison, watching as Xin Zhao left with Jarvan III. "Are you full?" Jarvan IV asked. "Let's go for a walk." He obviously hadn't come for the meal, he'd come to meet the brother he'd never known. "Sure." Luke accepted the invitation, and the two of them headed outside together. There weren't many people around. Jarvan IV sighed with feeling. "I really didn't expect to suddenly have a brother. I heard some of what happened on the way here, and about Aunt Melly I'm sorry. Back then, I was only 3 or 4 years old. If I'd had the ability to speak up, I would have supported it." His tone was incredibly sincere, because he truly meant it. At the time, Jarvan IV was only 3 or 4. He probably didn't even understand what was happening. But if the choice had been in his hands, he would have wanted to have a mother. Unfortunately, he hadn't had that power. "Mother's story happened so many years ago," Luke said calmly with a smile. "There's not much meaning in talking about it now. A lot of this really did happen suddenly. I never imagined this country's king would be my father or that a prince would be my brother. Haha, I've always kind of wanted a brother, actually." Jarvan IV looked Luke over, then nodded in satisfaction, almost talking to himself. "I've always been jealous that Garen has such a cute little sister. Now it's good I, Jarvan, have a very handsome brother too. Nobody has anything to envy anymore. From now on, if anything happens, come find me. I'll handle it for you." He patted his chest hard as he promised, giving a strong sense of security. And Luke could genuinely feel it. Jarvan IV's feelings were just as real as his father's. The two of them seemed to cherish this suddenly appearing bond of family. 16, Chapter 16, If I don't slack off now, then when? 16, Chapter 16, If I don't slack off now, then when? The next day, Jarvan IV took Luke to Jarvan III's bedchambers to pay their respects. Jarvan IV had stayed the night, sleeping in the same building as Luke. The two of them talked for quite a while, and it did bring them closer. When they arrived, it seemed Jarvan III already knew there wasn't much worth discussing here. After the two boys finished breakfast, he gave them some free time. If this were a few years earlier, Jarvan IV said while changing into fresh clothes, clearly preparing to leave, "I'd definitely take you out and show you the capital properly. But I've got too much on my plate lately. When father formally gives you your name, I'll come see you again." Right now, improving his own strength was the priority, but training the troops under him was just as urgent. Even though he held no official title in the army, the number of soldiers Jarvan III allocated to him kept increasing. Jarvan IV could feel it clearly as he grew older. Jarvan III stopped treating him like a child, and relied on him more and more. Luke replied, "We've got plenty of time ahead. No need to rush. True enough. From here on out, we'll take it slow brother to brother. Jarvan 4 smiled. The two of them walked side by side, nearly out of the palace already, when he said, "This is far enough." "Take care," Luke said, lifting a hand in farewell. Outside the palace, Jarvan IV's personal guards had been waiting for a long time. A carriage was ready, set to take him back to his own estate. After coming of age, Jarvan 4 had moved out of the palace. Luke still didn't know exactly where he'd moved to. But if nothing unexpected happened, once Luke was formally recognized and named, he would have to choose somewhere outside the palace to live as well. He watched Jarvan 4 depart. Then Luke stretched, letting the looseness seep through his limbs, and turned back toward his small building at an unhurried pace. By the time he returned, Xin Zhao was already waiting. "Xin Zhao, did you need something?" Luke asked. Jarvan 4 called Xin Zhao uncle, so Luke had followed suit. Xin Zhao might not share royal blood, but to Jarvan 3, he was closer than family. "Nothing special," Xin Zhao said, drawing a small booklet from inside his clothes and placing it on the table. "I'm here to give your highness something." He explained, "These are some notes I wrote down when I had time. I recorded a few body tempering techniques I learned in Ionia, and also some methods for awakening spiritual energy. If you've got nothing to do, you can practice." Luke took the booklet. When he opened it, he could still smell fresh ink. There was no way this was written in spare moments. This was clearly something Xin Zhao had stayed up all night to finish. Warmth rose in Luke's chest. He said seriously, "Thank you." "No need." Xin Zhao smiled. "I won't disturb you any longer. If you have questions, you can find me at the king's side." He didn't say much else. He stood, bowed out, and left. There wasn't much he could do for Luke. Most days, he had to remain by Jarvan 3's side to protect him, an unavoidable regret. If Luke had been raised in the palace from childhood the way Jarvan 4 was, and Xin Zhao could have taught him every day, perhaps Dematia could have produced two outstanding princes. What happened back then had hurt too many people in the end. After Xin Zhao left, Luke opened the booklet and began reading carefully. It wasn't just key points for body tempering. Xin Zhao had thoughtfully drawn little stick figure diagrams and added notes and insights. It was unbelievably easy to understand. Luke read while trying the movements. After only a few poses, he felt as if all his strength had been drained clean. Yesterday, Xin Zhao said Luke's foundation wasn't great. Luke very naturally shoved the blame onto that. It definitely wasn't that he was the problem. After resting a bit, Luke continued flipping through, until he reached the section on awakening spiritual energy. Spiritual energy was a very special kind of power. In different places, it was used in different ways. It wasn't the same as magic. Magic tended to be more direct in how it manifested. Spiritual energy, on the other hand, was more like resonance between body and soul. Generally speaking, you released spiritual energy to make the body stronger. And in Dematia, it was something you had to master if you wanted to become truly powerful. Dematia had been founded to protect those harmed by magic. The kingdom had despised magic from the start, but then a new problem emerged: how do you fight mages? Dematia had stood tall to this day not only because of Petricite, but also because of spiritual energy. Spiritual energy, also called willpower, was key. Warriors tempered their will and spirit, gaining power that could contend with mages. Later, as the threat of mages gradually lessened, this remained one of the major reasons Dematia still became a great power. Xin Zhao's notes included methods used in Dematia, and methods from Ionia as well. Luke read with care, then tried exactly what the booklet described. Time ticked by second. Nothing's happening at all. Luke opened his eyes, flopped backward onto the couch, and felt utterly drained. He'd worked at it for at least an hour. Forget spiritual energy, he'd almost fallen asleep. Am I really that talentless? Luke stared up at the ceiling, and for a moment, he felt like he had nothing left to chase. Before he understood how little he truly knew, he'd still clung to a sliver of fantasy: become strong, see the wonders of Runeterra for himself. But now he only hoped his luck would hold, and that he wouldn't end up as cannon fodder someday. Damn it, I'm still a prince of the realm. I've got a beloved king for a father, and a hardworking brother above me. What do I even need to do? Luke suddenly got it. He couldn't understand why he'd been tying himself in knots. There was nothing to agonize over. Let them handle the struggle. Let him enjoy the rewards. Strong or not, what did that have to do with him? If he had time to obsess over this, he might as well enjoy a few good days while he still could. With his mind finally loosened, Luke decided to stop trying so hard. Whatever was coming would come sooner or later. So before that day arrived, he might as well live well. Ding! Detected hosts, coast and give up, intent. Sign-in system successfully activated. Suddenly, a voice popped into Luke's mind as he lay on the couch, startling him so badly he jolted. Right after that, a flood of information about the sign-in system poured into his head. It was a sign-in system apparently designed to help Luke coast even better. He didn't need to do anything. Every day, all he had to do was tap sign in, and he'd receive rewards. It was divided into daily sign-ins, monthly sign-ins, yearly sign-ins, and special sign-ins. Each type granted different rewards. And the rewards also varied slightly depending on where he signed in. So even the system wants to see me take it easy in that case. If I'm going to slack off, why wait? Luke sighed with emotion. Who would have thought there really was a bright turn ahead? If he hadn't decided to coast, the system probably wouldn't have shown up at all. That only strengthened Luke's desire to keep coasting. 17, Chapter 17, Isn't this ridiculous? 17, Chapter 17, Isn't this ridiculous? With a thought from Luke. In the next second, an information panel popped up in front of his eyes. Host, Luke. Aptitude, 11, utterly mediocre. Realm, none. Skills, none. Subprofession, none. Items, none. A completely empty panel, with that, utterly mediocre, glaring so brightly it was almost painful. The moment Luke saw the system's evaluation, he understood. With aptitude like this, even if he worked hard for decades, he probably wouldn't amount to much. According to the system's info, aptitude was divided into 8 tiers: abysmally poor, utterly mediocre, workable, exceptionally gifted, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, and unparalleled. Luke's aptitude barely cleared the very bottom abysmally poor and only by a point. Each tier covered 10 points. To reach the final tier, you needed to break through to 100. Ding. Would you like to sign in? After glancing at the panel twice, the prompt appeared in front of Luke. He made a decision immediately and chose to sign in. Detected. This is the host's first sign-in. This sign-in is a special sign-in. Congratulations. You have obtained an advanced swordsmanship skill, Wine Technique Swordsmanship, automatically mastered to LV3 Basic Mastery. Congratulations. You have obtained Spiritual Energy Guidance, Primer. Congratulations. You have obtained Realm Upgrade Card, Initiate Late Stage. Congratulations. You have obtained Random LV6 Subprofession Card. Congratulations. You have obtained Sixth Sense Enhancement Serum. Rewards have been automatically stored in the system inventory. Please review and withdraw them at your convenience. Because it was his first sign-in, a whole pile of rewards exploded onto the screen, leaving Luke a little dazzled. He only needed one look to feel that none of these were ordinary. The first thing that surged into his mind was Spiritual Energy Guidance, Primer. He'd just been thinking about how important it was, and he'd tried for ages without even touching the edge of it. Of course, that was because of his aptitude. But now, with nothing more than a thought, he had already grasped it. It felt as natural as walking or running, like moving his limbs. Effortless. Instinctive. Detected skill, Wind Technique Swordsmanship. Learn. Seeing the prompt, Luke chose to learn immediately. Information about Wind Technique Swordsmanship flooded into his mind. It felt as if he'd trained in it bitterly for years, every cell in his body already familiar with the sensation. Speaking of Wind Technique Swordsmanship, there were 2 champions you couldn't avoid mentioning. One was Yasuo, the Unforgiven. The other was Yon, the Unforgotten. Both were disciples of the Wind Technique. Just watching that clean, swift, storm-like blade work was enough to understand how powerful it was. Luke had automatically mastered it to LV3 Basic Mastery. And as a bonus, once Wind Technique Swordsmanship reached Basic Mastery, Luke also comprehended a new skill, Wind Affinity. He could sense the wind that brushed past him with far greater detail. It seemed like a necessary condition for learning the wind technique in the first place. Second, mastering spiritual energy was also the key of keys. Otherwise, even if Luke had learned Wind Technique Swordsmanship, he still wouldn't be able to bring out its full might. The system's planning was surprisingly thorough. Luke then opened the inventory and focused on the remaining 3 rewards. He withdrew the Sixth Sense Enhancement Serum first. A white bottle almost like a drink appeared in his hand. He waited once, didn't hesitate, popped the cap, and downed it in a few gulps. The effect seemed to spread, but as for what it actually felt like, it wasn't obvious. Luke knew what Sixth Sense referred to. After waiting a moment and finding nothing else worth noting, he didn't dwell on it. Use the Realm Upgrade Card. Luke silently ordered it in his mind, and the system's prompt sounded at once. Use successful. As the prompt faded, Luke clearly felt a wave of energy spreading outward from his heart, gradually pouring into his limbs. It was as if every cell in his body was cheering, muscles all over him trembling faintly. It was an incredibly strange sensation. After a while, getting stronger without working for it feels amazing. Luke muttered, his mood impossibly refreshed. When the strange feeling vanished, Luke clenched his fist. He could plainly sense his strength had risen by a huge margin. As he was now, he could probably beat up 5 versions of himself from yesterday. Runeterra wasn't an ordinary world, after all. The power gap was wildly uneven. The strong were terrifyingly strong, and the weak were pitifully weak. But everyone had a path to grow stronger. So over the course of Dematia's history, a system had gradually taken shape to categorize strength. Named after knightly ranks, it went: Initiate, Valorous, Unyielding, Dauntless, Sanctified, Glory. From left to right, the higher the title, the stronger the person, and each realm was divided into early, mid, and late stages. Before this, Luke had only been an ordinary person, not even qualifying as an initiate. For a normal person, becoming an initiate wasn't hard. Even someone as mediocre as Luke could do it if you train day after day. Your body would naturally grow through relentless tempering. But the more strength you chased, the more limitations ordinary people faced. The further you went, the more you needed talent to support you. In one leap, Luke had become an initiate in the late stage, his strength rising sharply. The rewards this time were absurdly generous, and there was still one reward left for Luke to claim. And judging by the look of it, it was probably the best reward from this sign-in. A LV6 Outstanding Subprofession card. From the system's information, Luke learned that skills were divided into 9 levels. Even LV3 Wine Technique Swordsmanship was only barely past the first threshold. The 9 levels were LV1 Beginner, LV2 Finding the Path, LV3 Basic Mastery, LV4 Proficient, LV5 Expert, LV6 Outstanding, LV7 Peak, LV8 Transcendent, LV9 Return to Simplicity. It was easy to see that LV6 was already a very high level of mastery. Even though the sub-profession card was random, Luke figured that at this level, no matter what he rolled, he wouldn't lose. As for sub-professions, there were too many to list. Use the sub-profession card. Use successful. Luke willed it again, and the card vanished from the inventory. In the next second, the system's prompt sounded once more. Congratulations. You have obtained LV6 sub-profession skill, Cooking. Luke went speechless. In an instant, a massive amount of cooking knowledge appeared in his mind, so much that he couldn't digest it all at once. He just said that any random result wouldn't be a loss, and the system immediately handed him cooking. He was a prince of the realm. Was he supposed to personally step into the kitchen and cook now? Isn't this ridiculous? Luke laughed helplessly, but he didn't really care. It was a free reward anyway. There was plenty of time ahead, and sooner or later his sub-profession skills would naturally pile up. His first sign-in rewards were already more than generous. What was there to complain about? Chapter 18 You guys really hit the jackpot. Luke had actually noticed something. Back then, Melly, his mother, had left the capital alone. Right under the noses of King Jarvan III and Xin Zhao, she vanished without a trace. How did a woman without even proper identification manage that? Luke couldn't help it, really was curious. What exactly happened back then? But even if he was curious, he had no leads right now. All he could do was take it slow and wait. Slacking off is one thing, but being able to enjoy slacking off, that's the real art. Luke had decided to coast, but he didn't plan to waste a good life by doing absolutely nothing. Runeterra was a dazzling world, and if he ever got the chance, he wanted to travel and see it for himself. Still, when is that hopeless romantic going to snap out of it? Luke headed outside, lost in thought. He understood this world well enough. The moment he realized he couldn't get stronger through normal means, the last of his fighting spirit had been crushed, and he'd decisively chosen to coast. Because he knew that an ordinary person had a high chance of becoming cannon fodder when the disasters of the future arrived. But now things were different. On one hand, he didn't need to work himself to death anymore. On the other, he seemed to have gained at least some ability to face that hopeless romantic down the line, which meant he needed to manage the situation properly. Still, that could be tomorrow's problem. For now, live while you can. I wonder if I'm even allowed to leave the palace. Luke wanted to go outside for a walk. The palace was suffocating. Aside from staring into space in his room, there wasn't much to do. He really wanted to wander around. He'd only arrived in the capital yesterday, and he hadn't even had the chance to properly look around. He reached the entrance of Dawn Castle. The guard on duty was the same one he'd seen yesterday. He seemed to have received instructions in advance. When he saw Luke, he immediately saluted. "Your Highness." After the respectful greeting, the guard asked, "What brings you here?" "Hello." Luke smiled politely. "Can I go out?" "Of course." The guard stepped aside. "His Majesty anticipated that you might want to explore the city. He asked that you return before dark. Do you need a travel pass?" "No." Luke figured it would be more comfortable alone. Still, he hadn't expected King Jarvan III to be this attentive. He'd even briefed the guards at the entrance. The guard nodded. "Then have a safe walk." He watched Luke leave, remembering the order he'd received last night, and even now he still felt stunned. The kingdom had a second prince. Someone he'd seen just yesterday, and today he was suddenly the new prince. Changes came so fast it was almost unreal. Luke honestly hadn't expected it to be this easy to get out. Did the king really feel that confident letting a newly acknowledged son stroll around on his own? Obviously not. Sure enough, as Luke walked along the same route he'd taken yesterday, and the crowd around him grew thicker, he vaguely sensed someone tailing him. Not too close, not too far, but close enough that if anything happened, they could rush in immediately. The moment Luke felt it, he analyzed it. And in the next second, he was certain this was the effect of that sixth sense enhancement serum. That was probably why he hadn't noticed anything before. There simply hadn't been any situation where he needed a sixth sense. Since it wasn't harmful, Luke didn't care. He strolled leisurely through the streets. Even in the morning, the capital was already lively. People were everywhere, carriages rolled down the center of the road, some led horses along, and drivers hurried about, chasing a living. A few children ran past, laughing and playing with pinwheels in their hands. Their bright, childish laughter echoed near his ears, and Luke realized something. Judging from the architecture, daily necessities, and how people lived, this place was already quite developed. but developed still didn't really overlap with modern life. If the entire world was like this, then fine. But if his guess was right, then on the far side of the continent, Piltover could already use electricity skillfully, along with certain modern machines. That city stood at the very forefront of science. That wasn't surprising. What Luke really meant was this: based on what he knew, Dematia was currently in a kind of closed-off state. The country was old-fashioned and stubborn, feudal and conservative. It rarely built effective connections with the outside world. There was a phrase that fit it perfectly: staying in its own bubble. After all, Dematia truly was a powerful empire right now. From top to bottom, the national mindset was, we don't start trouble, but we aren't afraid of it either. Over all these years since the nation was founded, anyone who coveted Dematia had been beaten back. If things continued like this, Dematia might remain strong for a long time, but in the end, it wouldn't last forever. Why am I even thinking about this? I'll leave it to my brother to worry about. Luke realized his thoughts were drifting again. He shook his head with a chuckle and focused on the street scenery. He was here to enjoy royal treatment. As for future headaches, forget his father for a second. Even if something truly went wrong, he still had an older brother above him to shoulder it. No matter how you looked at it, it wouldn't be his turn. After walking for a few minutes, Luke suddenly felt something was off. There were more people following him. Interesting. I want to see what you're planning. Luke kept strolling as if he were out for a casual walk, but he headed toward a quieter route. The fewer people there were, the more he leaned into it until he turned into an empty alleyway. Not long after, people poured in from both ends of the alley. At a glance, there were about 8 of them. Oh, isn't this the rope scam guy? Luke swept his gaze over them and found a few especially familiar faces. The most familiar one, of course, was the guy from yesterday who'd been running that rope trick. Kid, you smashed our livelihood and you still dare to walk around like you own the place. If someone's getting unlucky today, it's you. The ringleader's eyes were vicious, clearly the type to hold a grudge. Yesterday, you had someone from House Crown Guard with you. Today you've got nobody at your side, huh? He cracked his knuckles, ill intent written all over him. Come on, Luke sighed, trying to talk him down. Is there really nothing we can discuss like adults? Turn back while you still can. The ringleader let out a cold laugh. Now you're scared? Kid, it's too late. I'm not scared. I'm just in a great mood, so I'm giving you a chance. Facing the slow encirclement, Luke looked almost regretful. You really are lucky. Of all people, you're the ones who get to run into a deal like this. You got scared, stupid. What the hell are you even saying? Brothers, get him. The ringleader couldn't be bothered with more words. Right now, he just wanted to get in there and kick this smug brat. He barked the order, took one step forward, and suddenly the world spun. In the haze, he vaguely heard someone shouting things like move. And, protect the prince, nonsense. Like that. Wait, didn't I say move? So why am I the one on the ground? And what prince? Where did a prince come from? Chapter 19. Go in and think it over slowly. All he felt was soreness all over. When the scam ringleader finally came back to his senses, he realized the one pinning him down was a cold-faced man in white. On the man's chest was a badge so unfamiliar the ringleader couldn't even guess where it came from, but he could confirm one thing. They were terrifyingly strong. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw his buddies already sprawled across the ground in every direction, groaning in pain. From start to finish, only 2 men in white had made a move. And from the moment they acted to the moment everyone was on the ground, only a few seconds had passed. Damn it, what just happened? The ringleader's brain short-circuited. His first thought was that he'd walked into a sting operation. This brat had deliberately come out to bait them. But seriously, for a few small-time guys like them, did it really warrant sending monsters like this? His vision flickered, and that punchable face appeared again, this time looking down at him from above. Luke asked, if someone tries to jump me in the street like this, what do they usually get? Your Highness, the man in white replied respectfully, it depends on your mood. Publicly harboring ill intent and attempting to assault the kingdom's prince is a serious crime. Minimum sentence 20 years. Luke nodded thoughtfully, then looked down again. You heard that, right? I gave you a chance earlier. 20 years. The ringleader nearly lost his soul. What the hell are you talking about? What prince? What, Your Highness? I just scammed a few people. I didn't even touch a hair on you. 20 years for that. He didn't understand what was happening, but he understood one thing very clearly right now: his life was in their hands. Want to know what's going on? Luke asked with a cheerful smile, looking straight into those desperate, pleading eyes. The ringleader nodded hard. Go inside and think it through slowly, Luke said. 20 years doesn't go by fast. When you get out, be a decent person. Luke had zero intention of explaining. The ringleader's vision went black for a second. He was so furious he almost spat blood. He genuinely couldn't figure it out. He'd only wanted to teach this brat a lesson, and now he was facing 20 years behind bars. The others froze too, stunned into silence. Thanks for stepping in, Luke said to the 2 men in white. By now, he'd already judged who they likely were. Probably subordinates under Xin Zhao. Protecting Your Highness is our duty, the man in white answered respectfully. I'll leave the rest to you, Luke said. Ignoring the begging at his back, he left that sentence behind and walked out of the alley. "Rest assured, Your Highness," the man in white replied seriously, looking at the scammers without a shred of sympathy. Luke stepped out of the alley and felt the sunlight soften against his skin. His mood stayed light. So this was the advantage of status. If he were still just a nobody like yesterday, wouldn't he have gotten beaten senseless in that alley for no reason? He didn't care what happened to the scammers. That was punishment they'd earned. If no one had been following him, he might have tested his current strength. Judging by how quickly those guys went down, they were probably only a bit sturdier than ordinary people. Then again, it was also possible the men in white were simply too strong. In the alley, Luke got a very direct taste of the gap in power. From the moment the men in white appeared to the moment the scammers were dealt with, only a few seconds. That kind of strength was at least unyielding, probably higher. Speaking of Miss Crownguard, I wonder what she's up to. Maybe I should go to House Crownguard and thank them. If the scammers hadn't brought it up, Luke might have forgotten. Today's mess had been a lot, but yesterday Lux had helped him in a big way. Whether by reason or by decency, he needed to go offer his thanks. "After I eat," Luke muttered, feeling his stomach growl. It was close to mealtime anyway. If I go right now, it'll look like I'm showing up to mooch dinner. He looked around and spotted a restaurant that seemed pretty good. The building had a distinctly Western style, clearly a notch more upscale than most of what he'd seen on the street. The people going in and out were all dressed in expensive-looking formal wear. Luke picked his spot and headed over. A server by the door saw a customer approaching and automatically pulled the door open. "Please come in." Luke didn't respond. He simply walked inside. The interior really was different in atmosphere, like a high-end restaurant. Several small tables in the center were covered with white tablecloths, laid with elegant cutlery. A faint perfume lingered in the air. Luke chose a table and sat down. Not long after, a server came over. "Sir, here's the menu. Do you have a reservation, or would you like to order directly?" "Directly." Luke took the menu and flipped it open. There were pictures, dish names, and descriptions. And he realized he wasn't unfamiliar with any of it. Every time his gaze passed over a dish name, information surfaced in his mind naturally. So this was what LV6 cooking did. He even knew a surprising number of dishes from Runtura. The prices were brutal. Even a normal dish started at several gold coins. Luke couldn't help but sigh. Rich people really did live luxuriously. But now he could enjoy that luxury too. 1 South Sea flameclaw crab, 1 3-color beef steak, 2 portions of each, and a fresh orange juice. After ordering 2 popular-looking signature dishes, Luke handed the menu back. "Of course. Please wait a moment." The server took the menu and left. The fresh juice was brought quickly. Luke wasn't particularly thirsty, so he just waited. Not long after, 2 people sat at the table beside him, apparently a couple. They wore gorgeous, expensive-looking outfits. They waved over a server and ordered with their chins held high. South Sea flameclaw crab and 3-color beef steak, those were also 2 of the restaurant's popular dishes. They were among the most expensive items on the menu too. Supposedly the ingredients were rare, and cultivating them took considerable effort. And they were only available in summer. The dishes came out soon, but the first table served wasn't Luke's. It was theirs. "Excuse me," Luke said, frowning as he called the server over. "I'm pretty sure I ordered first. Why are you serving them before me?" "Yes, sir," the server explained politely. "Our establishment uses a membership system. At any time, members are served first. The 2 guests at the table beside you are members." "Is that so? Good system." "All right." Luke nodded, not particularly bothered. If it was the house rule, there wasn't much to say. The couple glanced at Luke but said nothing, beginning to enjoy their food. They moved unhurriedly, napkins at their necks, knives and forks in hand, tasting with practiced elegance. "No wonder it's the South Sea flameclaw crab," one of them said, wearing an intoxicated expression. "The flavor is almost the same as when I came last year. Truly exquisite. And this 3-color beef steak, color, aroma, taste, all perfect. Not bad at all. One of the best things I've had recently." They even poured 2 glasses of grape wine and clinked them lightly. Luke glanced sideways, suddenly curious. Was it really that good? Chapter 20, "Are you 2 role-playing over here?" After waiting a little longer, the server finally came over carrying 2 dishes. "Enjoy." After setting them down respectfully, the server turned and left. Looking at the steaming food on the table, and after listening to the couple next door praise it for so long, Luke couldn't help feeling curious. He examined it closely. South Sea flameclaw crab. Just from the name, it was a type of crab that lived in the southern seas of Dematia. They usually weighed around 3 to 8 gene, and once cooked, flame-like patterns would appear on the shell. That information flashed through Luke's mind. Before serving, the restaurant had already finished the messy part and taken it apart. The central shell was used like a platter, with everything edible arranged neatly on top. It actually looked pretty nice. The first thing he saw was a layer of white crab roe, smooth, almost like steamed egg custard. It was rich with protein and nutrients. Luke picked up a spoon, scooped a mouthful, blew on it, and tasted it. It melted the instant it hit his tongue. No fishiness, no greasiness, just a faint milky aroma. Luke didn't say anything. After finishing the roe, he moved on to the orange crab fat and then the leg meat. The crab fat was soft and creamy, and together with the leg meat it carried a strong crab fragrance along with a natural kick of heat. It wasn't especially spicy, more like a built-in seasoning that boosted the crab's flavor. That was what made South Sea flameclaw crab famous, tender meat with a naturally fresh, fragrant heat. You didn't even need any dipping sauce. It really was delicious, but Luke felt something was slightly off. He set down the spoon and tools, then shifted his gaze to the three-color beef steak beside it. He hadn't specified doneness, so the default was well done. He'd already smelled the rich meat aroma while eating the crab. The steak was sprinkled with seasoning. The light char on the surface, the hints of red in the meat, and the pale sheen of juices, those three colors were where the dish got its name. Luke picked up his knife and fork, cut off a piece, and ate it. The flavor was deep, and even well done. The meat was still remarkably tender. The beefy tang had been handled well. He chewed twice and swallowed. It was satisfying, but not as mind-blowing as he'd imagined. If he made it himself, he could improve it by at least 50%. A strange thought popped into Luke's head, and he immediately shook it off. I'm a prince. Since when do I cook? Why am I even thinking about that? Then he focused on finishing the second portion. Ever since using the realm card, his appetite had noticeably increased. 2 portions of food was just enough to meet his needs. When he finished, Luke raised a hand to signal the server for the bill. Sir, your total comes to 10 gold coins, the server said politely. If you'd like to top up for a membership, you'll receive a 20% discount. 10 gold? Not much. It was a lot, actually. If Luke from 2 days ago had walked into this place, he would have called it highway robbery. But now, he felt it was worth it. He reached into his pocket only to grab a fistful of air. Luke froze. He'd forgotten he didn't bring money when he came out. Or rather, he'd already spent everything he had, and it hadn't even occurred to him. Sir. The server noticed Luke's odd expression and immediately became wary. The odds of someone trying to dine and dash here were low but not zero. Can you give me a few minutes? Luke stood up, trying to think. His first instinct was to reveal his identity, but he quickly rejected it. If he did that, the staff would probably just assume he was insane. Who would believe someone who couldn't pay for a meal? What are you going to do? The server's eyes sharpened with suspicion. How about this? Luke suggested, face serious. Come with me. I'll go get the money. Trust me, I'm not trying to skip the bill. After staring at Luke for a few seconds, the server ultimately decided to trust his face. If someone that handsome was out here eating for free, then what hope did a normal guy have? Fine, the server said. You go first. Luke turned and headed outside. He pushed open the door. The street outside was full of people coming and going. He scratched his head, scanned a few spots, and then suddenly walked toward one direction. He stopped in front of a fruit stand and said toward the inside, I didn't bring any money. Give me some. The fruit vendor blinked. What does that have to do with me? You didn't bring money, why is that my problem? What, are you trying to rob me? Suddenly, a white figure flipped out from behind the fruit stand. The vendor nearly jumped out of his skin. What the hell, since when was someone hiding back there? The white-clad bodyguard looked at Luke in surprise and bowed. How much does your highness need? His emotions were complicated. He was personally trained by the seneschal of Dematia, Xin Zhao, and he possessed a number of professional skills. One of them was concealing his position. Hiding somewhere that kept the target protected, wouldn't be noticed, but still allowed him to arrive instantly if something happened. But he never would have imagined his hiding spot would be discovered. Had he been exposed while following Luke just now? For a moment, the bodyguard honestly started doubting himself. 10 gold, Luke said. The bodyguard immediately took out a pouch, counted out several gold coins, then handed Luke the coins. Your Highness, 10 gold. Thanks. I'll pay you back later, Luke said, accepting the money with a grateful glance. Then he handed the 10 gold to the server, who was standing behind him with a face full of question marks. The server took the coins, looked like he'd just seen a ghost, and hurried away. Your Highness. Prince. What is this? Are you two role-playing right here in the street? Once the server was gone, the bodyguard said, Your Highness, you don't need to repay it. But I have a question. Luke turned his head. Go on. Can you tell me how you discovered me? The bodyguard asked. If he didn't get an answer today, he wasn't sleeping tonight. Oh, that. Luke laughed. Don't overthink it. My instincts are just sharper than most people's. I felt like someone was here, so I came over and asked as a test. He really couldn't tell the bodyguard was hidden there. But if he could sense someone nearby, that was enough. If nobody responded, he'd just try another spot. Understood. The bodyguard fell silent for a second, then flipped away and vanished from Luke's sight. He hadn't expected that answer, so it was just a random guess. That answer was acceptable. If you rely on luck, you'll hit once eventually. The bodyguard steadied his mindset. Luke turned and left as well, leaving behind a fruit vendor with a face full of confusion. Fine, roleplay if you want. But you stood here acting out a whole scene at my stall and you're leaving without buying a single piece of fruit. 21, Chapter 21. I already took off my pants. Full and satisfied. Luke stretched as he walked along the road, basking in sunlight that still wasn't too hot. Next, it was time to go see Miss Crownguard. He strolled and browsed as he went. Even at noon, the capital streets were still packed with people. Just then, Luke suddenly caught sight of a familiar figure flickering past a street corner in the distance. In that brief moment, all he saw was an absolutely stunning side profile. Then that tall silhouette vanished around the corner, seemingly turning left. No way he was mistaken. It had to be her. After a moment's thought, Luke quickened his pace and followed. When he reached the corner, he turned left as well. Luckily, that figure appeared in his sight again. He followed once more, then suddenly realized wasn't he acting like a creep. He was just curious, that's all, he only wanted to see what she was doing here. Luke comforted himself and ignored the thought that had flashed through his mind. After trailing her for a while, she zigzagged left and right, then suddenly slipped into an alley. Seeing that, Luke felt a weird sense of déjà vu. Had he been noticed? Driven by curiosity, Luke still walked up, but the moment he reached the mouth of the alley, he noticed a sign on the wall. Please purchase a mask at the shop next door before entering. Friendly reminder, standard masks cost 5 gold. Oh, what's this supposed to mean? Luke had to admit his interest shot up immediately. But buying a mask seemed to require money. After thinking it over, Luke glanced around a few times. Once he confirmed a direction, he walked over and stopped in front of a pile of weeds. Ahem, give me some money again. As soon as the words fell, a white figure slowly stepped out from the weeds. It's you again, what a coincidence. Luke recognized the familiar face and greeted him with a grin. Didn't think I'd guess right again. The white-clad bodyguard. He genuinely couldn't believe he'd been found 2 times in a row. This time, even he thought his hiding spot was flawless. But no matter how good the technique was, it still couldn't beat sheer luck, could it? The white-clad bodyguard adjusted his mindset and asked, Your Highness, how much do you need this time? 5 gold. Luke gave the number. Very quickly, 5 shining gold coins dropped into Luke's hand. Go hide again. Next time I probably won't be this lucky. Luke waved goodbye, then turned and headed for the mask shop. The white-clad bodyguard took a deep breath and silently comforted himself. 2 lucky guesses in a row was normal. Next time, he'd hide better. Inside the mask shop. Welcome. Do you have a mask you like? We also take custom orders, guaranteed delivery within 3 days. Luke pushed the door open and walked in, immediately spotting all kinds of bizarre masks hanging on the walls. Even the clerk who came to greet him was wearing an adorable rabbit mask. Just a standard one. Any recommendations? Luke looked around and asked. If you want standard styles, they're all on that wall over there. The prices are the same. The clerk pointed at the wall on the right. It was covered in animal masks. Luke browsed for a bit, and in the end, picked a frog mask that looked a little dopey. I'll take this one. Luke confirmed. I'll measure your head size. The clerk pulled out a measuring cord and wrapped it around Luke's head, then put it away and went into the back room. Not long after, he returned with a brand new frog mask. This is the best fit for you. 5 gold. Thank you for your purchase. As he spoke, he handed the frog mask over. Luke took it and casually passed over the coins. The mask didn't feel rigid in his hand, so after a moment's thought, he put it on right there in the shop. This kind of mask could even cover your hair. It basically only left the eyes exposed, but once it was on, it surprisingly didn't feel awkward at all. Breathing was smooth, and his vision wasn't affected either. 5 gold well spent. Not bad, Luke praised, noticing that even his voice sounded a little different. Our masks use a special material that can muffle sound to a certain extent, so your voice will come out a bit more dull than usual, the clerk explained when he noticed Luke's surprise. Luke nodded, walked out wearing the mask, and stood once again at the entrance to that alley. Then he stepped inside. Because of the terrain, the light in the alley wasn't bright. It was dim and shadowy. He didn't know where it led, so he could only walk downward step by step. But soon, he saw a door on the right side of the alley. Luke reached out and knocked. In less than 3 seconds, the door opened. A person in a service uniform wearing a rabbit mask stood behind it. Welcome. They stepped aside to let Luke enter. The moment he walked in, the door shut behind him. The lighting inside had that particular dimness of a special venue, a pale wine-red glow tinged with faint yellow. Past the door was still a corridor. The attendant spoke in a low voice. Please follow me. They were really playing it mysterious. Luke felt his heart start pounding. As he followed the attendant forward, he saw many other people wearing masks. Could it be? Was this some kind of special gathering? A masquerade party? TCH. He never would have guessed she had that kind of kink. Her image is ruined. Luke got a bit excited, looking around in every direction while following behind. After passing through the corridor, Luke realized he'd arrived at a huge venue. Masked people moved back and forth everywhere. In the main area, there were many separate ring platforms. There were also some private rooms. From time to time, sharp clashing sounds rang out, sword against sword. Welcome to the Swordsmanship Enthusiasts Training Camp, the attendant announced grandly as they turned back. Luke, ? I already took my pants off and you're showing me this? You're a Swordsmanship Enthusiasts Training Camp, why are you making it look as secretive as some kind of underground party? Damn it. To be honest, Luke was massively disappointed. He hated this kind of deception. The purpose of establishing the Swordsmanship Enthusiasts Training Camp is to let everyone who loves swordsmanship wield a blade without restraint, or give those enthusiasts a chance. Here, there is no difference in status. No nobles and commoners. Here, once you put on a mask, you and I are just ordinary people. Use the sword in your hands to carve out your dream. Stop. Stop. No matter how passionate you make it sound, my dream died 5 seconds ago. Luke sighed and couldn't help asking, does it cost money? The mask is the entry fee. Anyone can come here even if you use the weapons provided inside, there's no charge. However, if weapons or armor are damaged, there will be a small compensation. Of course, you may also bring your own, the attendant replied. 22, Chapter 22, The Frog Swordsman. Alright, you're done here. Luke waved a hand, ignoring the attendant, and started wandering around on his own. The attendant gave a slight bow without a word and went back into the corridor. Luke looked left and right. He still didn't see that figure again, but he was sure of one thing: she had come in here. And since she'd only just arrived, she wouldn't have left so soon. Might as well look around. Hey, kid, first time here? A warm, enthusiastic voice rang out. Luke lifted his head and saw a burly man wearing a bear mask, standing on a ring and looking at him. He nodded. Haha, want to come up and trade a few moves? The bear mask laughed twice. Even though the mask muffled his voice, it couldn't hide how rough and booming it was. Sure. Luke was actually pretty interested. Ever since he'd obtained the Way of the Wind swordsmanship, he hadn't tested it out. And now that he was here, this was a perfect chance. Then get up here. What kind of sword do you want? I'll have my buddy get one for you. The bear mask reached down and yanked Luke up onto the ring in one pull. The guy was strong. Still, strength alone didn't prove how good he was. A long-handled curved sword. Luke thought for a moment and picked a type. In a world that leaned this heavily Western, there didn't seem to be a strict difference between sabers and swords. To them, a blade was a sword, and a sword was a blade. Yasuo's wind blade looked exactly like a long saber. But people still insisted it was a sword. What could you do? The curved blade Luke asked for was basically the same kind of weapon. Got it. The bear mask gave a look to someone below the ring, then turned back with a chuckle. Hang on a sec. But while we wait, I need you to do me a quick favor. What favor? Luke asked. Rabbit, over here. The bear mask shouted. Not long after, an attendant walked over, holding a sheet of paper. The attendant asked, confirm registration. Confirm. The bear mask nodded, then looked at Luke. Kid, think up a name for yourself and register it. That way our match will be recorded. What's the point of that? Luke asked, surprised. Before the bear mask could answer, a few people showed up below the ring to watch. Haha, bear mask is bullying rookies again. How does he always catch them? Every time someone new comes in, he has to farm points off them. He looks like a brute, but he's pretty crafty. Haha, rookie killer. Kid, be careful. If you lose, you drop points. Some people laughed out loud, others kindly warned Luke. Get out of here. How is this bullying? I'm teaching him the rules. Bear mask got annoyed and waved at them, trying to shoo them away. Stop running your mouths. Points? What do you mean? Luke asked, curiosity kicking in. A helpful spectator pointed into the distance. A whole bunch of placards hung there, with numbers displayed behind them. See that? Those are points. In every recorded match, the winner takes a certain amount of points from the loser. If your score is high enough, it shows up over there, on that board. If you make the board, you're a famous swordsman in this training camp and the camp gives rewards, too. Luke studied it for a moment. At the top of the board was someone named. I'm not Fiora. Not a bad name. He thought for a second, then asked, but I don't have any points. Who says you don't? Someone replied. Didn't you pay the entry fee before coming in? Meaning the money spent on the mask. Luke understood, but another question popped up: what happened if you lost all your points? Couldn't someone exploit that to maliciously farm points? Don't overthink it, the same guy said, as if he'd read Luke's mind. The camp rules are strict. If you lose all your points, you have to top up again. And as for malicious farming, the big shot behind this place isn't someone we can afford to offend. With that, Luke got it. So there really was someone backing this whole operation. He couldn't help looking at the bear mask across from him, who suddenly seemed a bit sheepish. So this guy was trying to stomp newcomers. A rookie comes in, doesn't know the rules, signs a name without thinking lows and gets a chunk of points siphoned away. Alright then. Before that, he needed a decent name. Then I'll be Frog Swordsman. Luke thought for a moment, then said to the rabbit-masked attendant. Seeing that Luke still intended to fight Bear Mask, the crowd stopped talking and settled in to watch. Bear Mask started grinning like an idiot. Looking at Luke's lean frame, he felt like he'd just found free points. The rabbit-masked attendant wrote down both names, then confirmed, Bear Mask and Frog Swordsman. Do you confirm the match? Confirmed, Bear Mask answered first. Confirmed, Luke echoed. Alright, registered. Begin. The rabbit-masked attendant scribbled a few more lines, then stood to the side with the sheet, waiting. At that moment, Bear Mask's buddy came back and handed Luke his curved blade, along with some protective gear. Kid, put the gear on. Wouldn't want me to hurt you later, Bear Mask even reminded him kindly. Bear Mask himself was wearing protective gear, covering a few vital areas. Luke checked the weapon. It wasn't metal, but it was tougher than wood and it had no edge, basically no lethal cutting power. Still, if someone really knew how to use a sword, even a blunt weapon could injure you. That was why armor mattered. Luke obediently put the gear on. He wasn't that strong yet. Late trainee level Dematia had trainees everywhere. Bear Mask is bullying a rookie again. Come watch. Someone below seized the moment and shouted, instantly drawing in even more spectators. The two of them walked to opposite sides of the ring and faced each other. Bear Mask said, "In a moment, Rabbit will ring the bell. Listen carefully. The instant it rings, the fight starts." His weapon was a greatsword, huge, wide, and rough-looking. Exactly the kind of thing a lot of Dematians loved. Got it. Luke nodded, took a deep breath, and gripped his blade one-handed, focusing his mind. This was the first step of the way of the wind swordsmanship, gathering wind intent. At level 3, he could already gather a small amount. If he concentrated, he could feel an extremely faint breeze swirling around him. That was wind intent. It had many uses. It could boost the cutting power of the blade, or be used to protect the body. Once the way of the wind reached higher levels, it could even be unleashed outward. Bear Mask suddenly felt something off about this kid's presence, and instinctively got serious. Ding-ling. The bell rang. Bear Mask charged forward at once. The great sword in his hands looked fierce and powerful, and as he swung it, you could faintly hear the air compressing with a low hum. Ha! He grabbed the sword with both hands and, without hesitation, brought it down in a vertical overhead cleave. The attack covered a wide range, while still leaving room to defend. This was one of the greatsword's advantages. Luke didn't panic. His blade slid past the edge of the greatsword by a hair, and he twisted aside with nimble footwork. In the same motion, he snapped a slash out. Bear Mask lifted his greatsword upward, blocking the strike, but immediately felt a surprisingly strong force transmit through the blades. He didn't even have time to be shocked. He retreated a step and raised his greatsword diagonally into guard. But another slash came in right away. The lifted greatsword barely managed to catch it. At the same time, the defensive stance he just set up was knocked out of alignment. 23, Chapter 23, Im not Fiora, EC. 23, Chapter 23, Im not Fiora, EC. What a vicious offensive. Bear Mask had never felt this much pressure from a rookie before. He hadn't even had time to catch his breath when that blade flashed into view again. Not good. Ha! With a roar, Bear Mask exploded with brute strength and forcibly jolted Luke back. Luke hopped lightly backward, and the moment he saw Bear Mask already breathing hard, he gave him no room at all. He stepped in and unleashed sweeping blade in one fluid slash. The curved blade drew a long arc through the air, looking light and effortless, but carrying razor-sharp intent. Bear Mask had barely managed to get a breath in before he had to raise his greatsword to block again. Even though he stopped the strike, Luke rode the momentum of sweeping blade to squeeze forward, crushing Bear Mask's defensive space. His falling blade kept changing angles, in and out with total control. Bear Mask's strength was probably around the trainee stage as well, so Luke didn't feel much pressure. But for Bear Mask, it was the opposite. He was forced back step after step. Those hurried blocks kept draining his stamina. If these were real blades, he'd already have several new cuts on him. And he'd realized something too. This wasn't just some sword-obsessed rookie. This kid had a real foundation. TCH, this rookie's swordplay is seriously sharp. Yeah, it's aggressive as hell. Bear Mask is actually getting suppressed. Did you notice? Even while he's attacking, his footwork still keeps a defensive posture. He's got room to advance and retreat. Haha, Bear Mask hunts birds all day, and today the bird pecked him right in the eye. The crowd below watched with relish. Seeing Bear Mask eat dirt felt amazing. At this point, anyone who knew even a little swordsmanship already understood how this match would end. Sure enough, after only a few more exchanges, Bear Mask's greatsword was knocked right out of his hands. He immediately threw both hands up just as Luke's blade arrived at his face. Damn, kid. Old Bear really got caught out. Bear Mask had lost. Beneath the mask was a helpless expression. He gulped air, clearly drained. Luke drew his blade back and smiled. Good match. You've got good swordplay. In the future, you'll probably have a spot on that leaderboard. Bear Mask wasn't a bad guy at heart. After losing, he laughed and came over to pat Luke on the back, acknowledging his skill. Who knows about the future, Luke said modestly. Below the ring, the rabbit-masked attendant finished recording and announced, Bear Mask, minus 30 points. Frog Swordsman, plus 30 points. What? 30 points. Bear Mask instantly exploded, charging off the ring with reddened eyes. You're trying to kill me. Old Bear, you know the rules. Your points were way higher than his. Losing a big chunk is normal. Someone stepped up, forcing down a laugh as they tried to comfort him. Behind them, several people were already laughing out loud. Luke felt like this place was kind of fun. Still have stamina. Can you fight me? A voice rose from below the ring. Even with the distortion, you could still hear the chill in her tone. Luke looked down. A slim figure stood there, wearing different armor than the other, slight and sleek. In her hand was a narrow blade, and on her face was a white mask that hid her features completely. But Luke was certain. She was the one he'd followed. The duelist. The duelist. Let me fight you. I've got tons of energy. Me, I can fight. The moment she appeared, the nearby men erupted, scrambling to volunteer. No other reason standing below the ring was the #1 swordsman on the camp's leaderboard. I'm not Fiora. No one knew what she looked like, but her pleasant voice even through the mask her graceful figure, and her powerful swordplay made her a star in a training camp that was basically all burly men. She had a whole army of fanatics. You idiots, shut up. She's obviously inviting me. Bear Mask, who had been panting a second ago, somehow looked fully recovered now. He stepped forward with righteous conviction. Honestly, Old Bear only used 1/10 of his stamina earlier. I've got plenty left to accept the duelist's invitation at full strength. Up on the ring, Luke looked down and said, I've still got a bit of gas. I should be able to fight one more. Good. The duelist hopped lightly onto the ring. Bear Mask, completely ignored by both of them, fell silent on the spot. Under the mask, it was probably the most awkward face imaginable. Do we need to register? Luke asked. No need. The duelist shook her head and said coolly, the gap between us is too large. There's no point recording it. I'm only interested in your sword technique from earlier. Don't worry, I'll suppress myself as much as possible to fight at your level. Her tone was full of pride. She wasn't looking down on Luke, she was simply stating a fact. That's honestly kind of heartbreaking to hear, Luke said with a helpless laugh, knowing she wasn't wrong. The difference between them was huge. The only reason he'd caught her attention was because of the way of the wind swordsmanship he'd shown. A circle of people gathered below, all wanting to see the fight between a rookie and the camp's strongest. More importantly, watching the duelist fight was a treat. Whenever you're ready, you can attack, she said, raising her narrow blade. All right. Luke gripped his curved blade at an angle and answered sharply, already bursting forward. After one step, the blade in his slanted grip swept out in a horizontal cut. He lowered his center slightly. This was a common body movement in the way of the wind, meant to keep his options open for immediate adjustments. But before he could close the distance, the duelist was already prepared. She gave Luke no chance to get in close, maintaining a fencing-like range. The instant Luke lunged into her striking distance, her narrow blade thrust out. Luke had no choice but to abandon the chance to stick close. In mid-swing, he changed targets, his horizontal cut slammed into her thrust. The two weapons collided and bounced apart, but the duelist's narrow blade came back even faster, stabbing again. Luke immediately blocked sideways, catching the thrust precisely with the flat of his blade. In the next heartbeat, he flowed into another change, his blade turned vertical, sliding along her weapon with a sharp scrape, and he surged forward with sweeping blade. The duelist's eyes flickered. So this swordplay really was interesting. She didn't panic. With calm footwork, she stepped back, just as agile as he was. In that moment she found the opening to retract her thrust and meet Luke's incoming pressure. Their blades collided again, only this time they didn't bounce away immediately. They bound for a second before the two swordsmen disengaged and retreated. And once again, the duelist was the first to seize the next opening and launch an attack, partly because of the raw gap in strength, and partly because of her refined mastery of her own style. Luke felt the pressure instantly. He hadn't expected that the first real time he used the way of the wind swordsmanship, he'd run into an actual expert. 24, Chapter 24, A Big Shot's Love for Newbies. 24, Chapter 24, A Big Shot's Love for Newbies. Fiora hadn't lied. She really had suppressed her strength, keeping herself as close as possible to Luke's level. Even so, it was still a challenge for her. After all, it wasn't easy to take power you'd honed through countless battles and force it back down to a stage you'd already left behind. But it wasn't a big problem. Fiora liked challenges. Luke thought that if they were truly on equal footing, he wouldn't necessarily lose. Facing Fiora's assault, he pushed his wind control swordsmanship as far as he possibly could. From the crowd's perspective below the ring, the two of them were using entirely different styles, yet neither seemed inferior. Attack and defense wove together on both sides, blades colliding again and again in a dizzying, brilliant exchange that left people's eyes struggling to keep up. Didn't expect this. That newcomer is actually trading blows with Fiora. To fight her to this extent, the rookie's already incredible. That sword style really is something, but don't forget Fiora is suppressing her strength. True, holding herself back definitely affects her offense to a degree. Man, I really want to see them fight when they're actually equal. The audience buzzed with excitement. Below the ring, Bear Mask stared at Luke and raised a hand to wipe sweat from his mask despite the fact there wasn't any. Seriously, this rookie is that strong? Back when he fought him earlier, Luke clearly hadn't gone all out. Thinking about it carefully, back when Fiora had first entered the training camp, he'd also been blind enough to try and teach her a lesson. And then he'd been hung up and beaten senseless. Up on the platform, Luke could feel his stamina draining faster and faster. He could practically feel the sweat soaking his face beneath the mask, and even gathering the wind around him was starting to take real effort. Then, right at that moment, Fiora's offense suddenly stopped. Luke, puzzled, halted his blade mid-swing and asked, "What's wrong? Your swordsmanship is very good." Fiora rarely praised anyone's technique, but Luke truly qualified. Then she continued, "There's no meaning in continuing like this. I win by sheer endurance while you're already running low. Even if I win in the end, it would be an ugly victory. This time, let's call it a draw." Their strength had never been equal to begin with. In the short term, she simply couldn't run out of stamina. But Luke was only a late-stage trainee. Under the pressure of her suppression, he wouldn't be able to hold out much longer. Then doesn't that mean I'm the one getting the better deal? Luke grinned. Train your blade well. When you've fully mastered this style, I'll fight you again. Her voice remained cool and distant. She could tell what Luke was using right now was only the beginning. This sword style had far more potential than what it currently showed. In the future, he could become much stronger. Her sharp duelist's intuition made her certain of it. After speaking, she gave a light hop down from the ring and said, "Bunny, transfer him 300 points. Are you sure you want to do that?" The bunny uniformed attendant asked. "I'm sure." After Fiora nodded, she left without looking back, leaving only a lone, arrogant silhouette difficult to approach, and even harder to draw close to. 300 points. As expected of Fiora, so generous. I'm insanely jealous. Jealous +1. Luke watched Fiora's retreating back and asked curiously, what can points be used for? Points? Oh, there's a lot you can do with those, a helpful spectator answered. You can rent a private training room in this camp, or buy food, drink services too. You can even exchange points for cash. The rate is 5 to 1. Luke did the math. 300 points, that was 60 gold coins. That wasn't a small amount at all. No wonder Bear Mask had looked so shocked earlier. Beating him in a match was basically winning 6 gold coins in one go. Luke and Fiora weren't close at all. And yet just because Luke had shown this wind control swordsmanship, she'd rewarded him with 300 points. Thinking about it that way, Fiora really was generous. Was this what a big shot's kindness to a newbie looked like? The swordsmanship training camp really was interesting. Luke, having spent a fair bit of energy, rested inside for a while and watched a few other matches. After resting for about long enough, he got up and left. If he had the chance later, he'd come back to play around some more. But for today, he still had other things to do. Leaving the alley, Luke wasn't worried about anyone recognizing him. He simply took off the mask. Next, he was going to see Miss Crownguard. As he walked, Luke suddenly thought, if he was going to thank Miss Crownguard, was it really appropriate to show up empty-handed? And that led to a new problem. What gift should he bring? Just as he was thinking that, his gaze landed on a cake shop along the street. He walked up to the storefront and saw all kinds of cakes displayed inside. Given Dematia's feudal atmosphere, a scene like this shouldn't really exist. But in reality, Dematia was only semi-isolated. Local merchants still did business with outsiders, so some foreign things still found their way into the country and became localized over time. From the background stories alone, you could tell that Lady Lestera Bovelif, Dematia's greatest merchant house, had once traveled all across Runeterra and brought back many useful things. During the Cold War between Dematia and Nakuz, she had even taken her daughter, Sona, to perform in many places. Cake was one of those imported products originally brought in from Piltover. Then Luke saw the price tags under the cakes. 5 silver coins for a slice. That expensive. He patted his pocket. If he'd known, he would have exchanged some points for money back at the training camp. Luke thought for a moment, then turned and looked around. After confirming a spot, he walked over, and stopped in front of a mannequin statue. "Give me another gold coin." From behind the statue, a white-clad bodyguard perfectly aligned with the statue's pose slowly stepped out and stared at Luke seriously. "Your Highness, are you sure you found me by luck? It's you again." Luke hadn't expected it to be this perfect of a coincidence 3 times in a row, finding the same guy. The white-clad bodyguard practically wanted to cry. He wanted to ask the same thing, why him again? There were so many guards following along to protect His Highness. Why was it always him who got found every time? He was starting to suspect his hiding technique was just terrible, and that was why he kept getting caught. Ahem, it really was luck. Luke took the gold coin the guard handed him, then patted his shoulder in consolation. The bodyguard said nothing, but his eyes had changed in that instant. He didn't believe Luke anymore. "Yeah, right. Your Highness is absolutely lying to me. What kind of luck finds the same person 3 times in a row? It's not luck, me stealth is just too weak." Clenching his fist in silence, the white-clad bodyguard swore that once he got back, he would train his stealth technique in secret. Until he reached mastery, he would not leave the mountain again. Many years later, Runeterra would see the rise of a terrifying infiltratorny whose victims never even knew where he was when they died. But that was a story for another time. For now, Luke walked into the cake shop, the image of Miss Crownguard's face flashing through his mind. He had no doubts, the gift he'd chosen was absolutely the right one. No matter how you looked at it, she was the type to be easily won over by something like this. Still, Luke himself also liked sweets. He looked around the shop for a bit, then chose 2 strawberry cakes, his favorites. 25, Chapter 25, Don't you have any idea? EC. 25, Chapter 25, Don't you have any idea? EC. Carrying the cake box, Luke wandered along while looking for the direction to the Crownguard estate. On the way, unable to resist his curiosity, he finished his own portion first. Before long, noon had already passed. The sun overhead began to give off an unpleasant heat, and there were far fewer people on the streets. Luke finally found where the Crownguard family's manor was. He stopped in front of a small estate, though even small still looked imposing and grand. It was only small because there weren't many direct members in the Crown Guard line. There was no need for a massive residence. Behind the iron gate blocking the road, a guard in a small booth noticed Luke. He opened the door and stepped out, asking, "What business do you have here?" "My name is Luke. I'm here to see Lux. I hope you can pass the message along. Please wait a moment." The guard looked Luke up and down, said nothing more, and turned to head toward the manor. Luke yawned as he waited. A short while later, the guard returned, this time with someone behind him, a woman. She had golden curls. Her features resembled Tiana's a little, but she seemed older, though it was easy to tell she must have been a beauty in her younger years. She wore simple clothes meant for relaxing at home, but even in something that plain, she still radiated the unmistakable presence of a noblewoman. It wasn't something she was deliberately projecting, it was an aura formed over many years. "Come in." The noblewoman opened the door and welcomed Luke inside, smiling warmly. "I was planning to go see you this evening. I didn't expect you to come to me first. Lady Agatha, it's our first meeting. I'm sorry I only prepared a gift for Lux." Luke spoke with perfect courtesy. Even though he had never met her, he still knew exactly who she was. Agatha, Crown Guard, Tiana's sister, Lux's mother. A true Crown Guard by blood, with a status as high as it got. No need to be so formal. "In the future, don't bring gifts when you visit," Agatha said with a relaxed smile. "You've only just arrived in the capital. Once you've been here longer, you'll understand the relationship between the Crown Guards and the royal family." She wasn't wrong. Since Dematia's founding, the Crown Guards had been loyal to the crown. From ancient times to the present, there was no blood tie between them, and there had never been a marriage alliance. Yet their relationship was closer than brothers. Luke nodded and followed Agatha into the main house, taking a seat on the sofa in the living room. A servant soon brought tea and set it down. During that time, Agatha watched Luke with quiet curiosity. This new prince who had suddenly appeared in the kingdom, she truly had planned to meet him at dinner. And now he had come directly to her. He was a fine-looking young man, clean and neat, and it was clear from his face that he'd suffered quite a lot in the past. When she thought about it, he really was a pitiful child. "Don't be so stiff. Treat this like your own home. When your brother visits, he's never once acted like a guest, they just does whatever he wants." Agatha looked at Luke sitting across from her. She knew that since this was their first meeting, some awkwardness was inevitable. So she took the initiative and changed the subject. "Speaking of which, I should thank you. You didn't let Lux lose face completely, getting scammed like a fool and not even realizing it." "Ahem. With Lux's intelligence, I'm sure she would have spotted the flaw soon enough." Luke spoke up in Lux's defense, even if, deep down, he wasn't entirely convinced. "Ha." Agatha seemed to let out a dismissive little snort. But when Luke looked up, he still saw the same gentle, kind face. Agatha smiled and said, "Don't polish it for her. Still, I didn't expect fate to line things up so neatly." If Lux had done one good thing yesterday, it was probably running into Luke on the street. "Yeah." Luke glanced around and asked curiously, "By the way, where is Lux?" "Just call her Lux. Your brother calls her little sister, and calls me aunt. You can do the same." Agatha waved a hand, telling Luke not to be so formal, and then a smile surfaced on her face. "As for Lux, she's atoning." "Atoning?" Luke froze for a second. Then he heard Lux's voice. "I've had enough." An angry shout came down from the second floor. Lux burst out of her room in delicate pajamas. The bright, cheerful hair from yesterday was a bit messy now, and she vented her outrage toward downstairs. "Don't you think restricting someone's freedom is exploitation, something people in power do to people without it? My life should be blooming out in the world, not locked inside this stupid house, copying homework over and over again." At that moment, Lux looked nothing like a refined young lady. She looked like she was being driven insane. And Agatha, who had just been warm and gentle, tilted her head up and sneered. "There's no people in power, and people without it, here. There's a mother, and a disobedient daughter. Why you're locked in your room, don't you have any idea? Oh, and Miss Crown Guard, one more thing, we have a guest." Lux paused, then shifted her gaze to the right. Sure enough, she saw a familiar figure sitting on the sofa, calmly drinking hot tea as if he'd seen absolutely nothing. A single tuft of blonde hair on Lux's head suddenly shot straight up. Her expression changed, and in the blink of an eye she sprinted back into her room. After a while, she emerged again, now wearing a lovely outfit. Her blonde hair had been neatly tidied, and she seemed like a completely different person, her posture poised and elegant. She walked down the stairs as if nothing had happened at all, smiling like a perfect young lady. "Your Highness, welcome to the Crown Guard home." Agatha laughed at the worst possible time and took a sip of tea. Lux shot her a glare, ignored it, and looked back at Luke. "Sauhi, are you here?" Luke smiled back. "I came specifically to thank you. This is a small token of appreciation." He picked up a strawberry cake and handed it to her. Lux's eyes lit up, and she accepted it happily. "Thank you." It was obvious she really did like the gift. Looks like Luke hadn't guessed wrong. "Congratulations," Agatha said, finishing her tea until only a little remained. She set the cup down on the table and looked at Lux. "Since he's here to see you, I won't interrupt. Take care of the guest, Lux. Don't let me hear later that you were a poor host." In her view, People their age had more to talk about. There was no point in her staying. As she spoke, she stood up and looked at Luke again. Since you're here, stay for dinner tonight. I'll have someone take you back afterward. An invitation from an elder couldn't be refused. Luke hadn't planned on eating here, but it seemed he couldn't avoid it in the end. He nodded. All right. Take care, mother. Luck sat down, beaming, and waved to see Agatha off, watching her leave.
Hi guys. I made a paid service in Telegram where you will find a great collection of fanfiction audiobooks organized and regularly updated. What you get? An unlimited access to the full audiobook library. New fanfiction audiobooks added regularly. You can play audios directly from Telegram anytime. Joining our service is available through a monthly subscription of $5. You can pay using PayPal or Ko-fi. So what are you waiting for? Send me a message on Telegram or Discord. I will provide the payment details. After the payment is confirmed, you will receive access to the private Telegram channel containing all audiobooks. If you enjoy fanfiction and prefer listening instead of reading, this library is made for you. Message me anytime to join.